I'm Gary Sechrist, the Supervisor of Ag Services for the county.
Jeremy Wixon, Director of Operations for Lethbridge County.
You're not going to play along?
Come on, Candace.
Logan Miller, farmer from Ready Made.
I'm John Curvis, Counselor for Division 4 for Lethbridge County and Deputy Reeve.
I'm Bob Vanderveen and I'm in charge of the
Eric Van Essen, Counselor, Division 5, Monarch North.
Lauren Hickey, Counselor Division 1, Highway 512 and south and a little east of 845.
And Dan Captain, Anchorage, West Town, and I'm Bill McMillan. I'm the Environmental Services Manager.
Then we'll, that's carried. So then we'll go to the minutes of last meeting, and some people had some trouble with getting into it. Anyway, on not on, because you could go to PDF and you can get it that way. Did everybody, did you guys all look through it, or? Pardon me?
Worked through it last night.
Okay, yeah. Yes.
I'd like to move that we accept the minutes of the September 8th, 2022 ASB meeting as presented.
Okay. Any questions? Not? Everybody in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll move on to reports, and we'll start with the Supervisor of the Agriculture Service Board, Gary.
All right, we'll do my report, and if you need to stop me and get clarification on anything, just go ahead. Starting off the ASB grant, we're in our 5-year cycle, nearing the end already. Our annual funding is $123,000 for the legislative stream and $91,000 for resource management. Moving on to our activities, mowing. So this year we did about 5,050 miles of gravel and hardtop road slope. That's average of what we've been doing the last few years. So we didn't need to do mowing north of Picture Butte in the Sundial area a second time. It didn't grow back enough. So hamlets and subdivisions, we usually mow them twice, and that's what happened last year. Also, our last round of the roadside mowing, we'll flip through them and make them look good and finish them up for the year. We also completed some mowing for weed control in hard-to-spray areas and shoulder poles where grass was yet to be planted or reestablished. A big concern for us for the mowing and spraying, we mowed more in the Chin and west to Highway 845 and then from Highway 3 to the river. The reason we're mowing more in there, the weeds are growing and it's very difficult to spray in that potato country, and we are anticipating more potatoes to be grown. We are going to back away from spraying a little bit there and do a little bit more mowing. We've also got a machine, it's a gravel retriever. A lot of the problem is the weeds right on top of the road. It's a little disc that we're going to try to just cut the weeds if they we aren't able to spray or mow. And when you mow, sometimes they grow back. With this disc gravel retriever, they should be taken care of for a while. So mowing, our level of service. So each activity we're going to have a level of service and how that relates to what we accomplished. We got all of our mowing done. I mean, some places we don't intend to mow twice if we don't have to. We were over budget on this activity by approximately $30,000, and that is simply because of the cost to operate machines and fuel. The cost of equipment has gone up a lot, and we have to pay for that through our budget. So we were over by about 30,000 there. We made it up in other areas. Weed control, the majority of roadside spraying took place in divisions 5, 6, and 7, and that was augmented with spot spraying throughout the county. Roads seeded were also sprayed when the grass was mature enough to handle a chemical application. We like to get on those roads as soon as we think they can handle it, because the weeds they're very weedy areas that they turn into. So we sprayed over 1,280 miles of right-of-way. That's 49% of the county. Our goal is to spray 33%, so we reached that goal. A lot of this spraying, we've combined the road top for vegetation control with roadside spray on those numbers, just because it's a spray application. Inspection of Old Man riverbed and shore sites, that resulted in us releasing some biocontrol agents. That's how we're controlling weeds in those areas now, because amongst trees along the river and the bed and shore is basically the high water mark. That's not a good place to put chemicals, so we're releasing bio agents, and 6 were released last year. All reported and identified weed sightings in the right-of-way were sprayed, mowed, or pulled, and the targets here are leafy spurge, knapweed, toadflax, and scentless chamomile. Our weed inspectors everybody's trained to identify weeds, and we go out there and spot spray those, and we have a record. We GPS mark everything. The next year, we go see how we did, and if there's touch-ups needed, we'll reapply. Usually, we're getting ahead of those. So, in 2022, there were over 40 weed inspector consultations. So that's the weed inspector talking to people about their weed issues, maybe giving some advice, or in 2 cases, giving a weed notice. So we had 2 weed notices last year. We didn't have to act and do the control measures, but the weed notice were to the same individual. Extension staff produced a leafy spurge management video. The video was produced in cooperation with the South Region municipalities, a few of them, the Bud Tribe, and the Alberta Invasive Species Council. And we had that video was featured at the 2023 Alberta Invasive Species Council conference a few weeks ago. It's well received. If you haven't seen it, take a look. Also, I presented at the college on the Weed Control Act in December. It's something I'm starting to do every year or other. We touch on other things other than the Weed Control Act pass everything. The students are very engaged, so it's something we like to do. Our level of service on weed control, like I said, we 49% of weed control road seed saw sprays, 33% is our goal. So we're over the amount. We're using chemicals that are a little more economical for now. I put out a chem tender, and we met with chem reps last week. Chemicals are going up anywhere from 5 to 8%. So that'll eat up our $15,000 surplus if we use those same chemicals.
Gary, you were saying here that districts 5, 6, 7 were mostly sprayed. Was it not necessary 1, 2, 3, 4 then, or?
No. So in our level of service, we'll show you the map. We rotate 1/3 of the county. So that was the third of the county that the weed control was done on this year. Other areas was spot sprayed, but sometimes it's a little more than spot spray. There's roads that we just have to outright spray, especially in the far north and the far south of the county, traditional dryland areas, because the mowers are last to arrive there. So the weeds are coming, we have to spray those roads, otherwise we'll have a mess. This year's area is going to be...
Hey, wait a minute.
Yep.
John.
In terms of you exceeding the expectations for spraying, is that a result of you found more weeds, or is that just we had more time and the weather was more receptive to it?
Well, I think more weeds. I mean, we don't like to leave weed infestations to grow to 2 feet along the roadway. And when we find those, we do spray them. Also, it's a result of us combining the road top spraying. So we have through Public Works, we'll spray the edge of the road. And that's to help graders with excess vegetation, whether that be grass or weeds. So we've combined those two because it is a spray application, and even when we're going out and doing our roadside spray, it's the top of the road. It's our biggest issue. we're trying to stay a little further back of crops. Like, we're not leaving a buffer zone on a barley field, but we're not going to put anything that's got a residual chemical near that point. So we're using contact chemicals more so than residual. We'll use residual chemicals on our pavement because it's you know, the edges of those roads are pretty clean. Moving on to pest control. So the annual grasshopper survey, it showed our numbers where we surveyed. We survey every township. They're very similar to 2021. However, there were hot spots in the county where in September, producers were spraying grasshoppers. Carmangale is a hot spot, and often down by the airport is also a hot spot. So the grasshopper survey results are there and the forecasts. We also met with Dan Johnson from the university and the city of Lethbridge. They had an outbreak in 2021 on the west side, and Dan gave us a good education on grasshoppers. When we do the survey, that's in August, usually first week. You don't often get the proper forecasting because once June hit last year, Dan was out looking for grasshoppers and seeing what the rains in June did. They wiped out half of the populations that were gonna happen for last year. So that the rains of June were very important for reducing the grasshopper numbers. And like you say, it'll be the same this year with some of those hot spots. So.
Horn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Gary, would it be feasible to, in those areas where grasshoppers are a problem, if you're gonna be roadside spraying anyway, would it be possible to include a mixture to spray for the grasshoppers as well?
It's not in something we do. What we do allow is producers can apply to spray those areas for themselves. So they can apply on the county right away because that's often where the issues are. We've had that permitting system forever. Nobody's ever applied to do that. It is happening. I mean, they were spraying grasshoppers last year with the airplane, right? So I'm sure they're taking care of the right of way. And the grasshopper infestations are often not in the highly populated areas. They're in the dry landed areas of the county, out in Sundial or south by the airport. So no, I don't think that's something we want to get into for sure. I haven't looked into it, and I'm not aware of any other counties doing that.
What would that add to the cost if you would mix that?
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what the legal tank mixes are either. It might have to be a separate application. I'm not sure for us. But I mean, they used to do this sort of thing with horrible chemicals back in the 80s, and the guys that were putting it on with those chemicals, they had to get tests to make sure they haven't accumulated too much in their bodies. So it's not something you want to put staff through. If the farmer needs to do it, then you're spreading out that risk. I mean, if the staff was going out and spraying every road with something that's going to take care of grasshoppers, they're taking too much of a dose on themselves. Moving on, the Alberta armyworm survey was carried out by ASB staff again. Low numbers in 2022, and we've got the county insect survey attached to this, so all the surveys that we were part of, you can see those results. Bacterial ring rot, that's potato disease, so every year the Potato Association gives us a number of fields that we look at. We anticipate those fields going up just with larger potato production in the county, so that's going to add to our tasks that we do. Lethbridge County clubroot and blackleg inspections, we didn't identify any fields here for clubroot. Blackleg is prevalent in a lot of canola fields, but it's prevalent, but it's not to a lot of severity so far. But I've seen some survey results from last year that just came in, and blackleg is starting to build, whether it's resistance breaking down, and we intend to put out information on our social media on what's happening with blackleg and other surveys. Right now, I don't think it's a very damaging in the county with the severity. We also responded to numerous calls from producers regarding alternatives to strychnine, And if you took a look at our last newsletter, we had all those alternatives listed in there. And obviously, there's no good application other than what the strychnine was. It was a single dose. These other ones are usually multi-feed baits. So.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I believe there was a resolution brought forward to the province. Have you heard anything back on any reception of that?
We haven't heard anything back, but the resolution for strychnine has been ongoing for years. Since they announced they were getting rid of it, there's been resolutions. I do not see it going anywhere. We lost 6 strychnine years ago, and then the gophers build up, and there's a big fuss often in Saskatchewan, and they bring it back. If you want to read the report on why they don't want it anymore, it's the secondary kills. Something eats the gopher and dies, and it is I think a 100-page report. If you want to get into that. Moving on, rabies detection.
Just 1 minute. If I'm not mistaken, we also had a resolution brought forward about the strychnine and stuff like that at the annual general meeting of the ABS, right? SB.
Yes, that was a resolution, and
Yeah.
that's in the minutes on it. It was carried forward. They're always carried forward, but it never hasn't ended up in bringing strychnine back thus far. So we have been doing a rabies detection survey. So we hire a contractor, and he traps skunks, and then those skunks, they take the heads to the ADRI and test them for rabies. So that program is finishing up. The province does not see any need to test anymore, so they're not going to be testing. We're not going to be trapping skunks and looking for rabies anymore. Dutch elm disease survey was done in the Monarch area. No trees were identified there. This year we intend to continue that survey with a private contractor, and they're going to be looking at the hamlets of Iron Springs and Turn and immediate area. This is a concern area for us because of the landfill in Iron Springs. If you have trees that are dying or dead, that's where you take them. So they do take care and they burn that pit often, which is good, but definitely a concern area for the county for if we're ever to see Dutch elm disease. Soil conservation, we're still talking about that. The winter and spring of 2022 saw a drought condition combined with wind events that created instances of soil erosion. We put information out to producers regarding their responsibilities, and we also put out PSAs. It always a lot of interest, and people listen up when they're on the radio. We've had some good comments that is necessary from the agriculture producers that are keeping their land under control. We worked with a few producers, and we removed soil from the ditch in a few places. These guys were very good on doing that. No cost borne by the county. This spring, about a month ago, we talked to a producer about stopping soil erosion on his land. We went in with the grader and we ripped it. Hasn't blown since. I guess we stopped it right there, didn't we? So that particular case, the fellow went in and disked. He had a little bit of sifting. He went in with a disc in January. Not a good idea. Also, when we went in there with the grader, it was frozen, like it always often is. We ripped it. It was tough to get into it. We had 4 shanks on. Next time, maybe we try 3. And if it's going to blow and if that's going to happen, we may even have to take a cat in there and go with a single ripper. We are trying to educate people on soil erosion, but sometimes people just don't listen, so it's going to be harder. We're not asking anymore to the repeat offenders. We're saying, hey, you got to do something. And that particular case, it was drifting on into the right of way on a highway, and we got a letter from the producer that he will take care of the cleanup if requested by the Department of Transportation. Not our road, but we don't want to see that either. So
So these are usually repeat offenders, correct?
In some cases, not always. I mean, it depends on crop rotation sometimes. I mean, there are very good producers that are struggling with soil erosion. It's just the conditions right now. This year was better than last year and the year before, but depends what happens here in the spring. So.
Dan?
So potato acres expand, how are we gonna educate?
Potatoes are a very high value crop, and the folks that are growing potatoes do whatever they can to stop it. It's often, as soon as those potatoes are off, there's manure going on to hold it. Very few of our issues come from potato land, just they're proactive.
And it's also, with the manure spraying, I see it on a regular basis actually now, and I think the NRCB does give you the okay to spread it on the frozen field, like if you have an issue with soil erosion, everything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what kind of, like, for repeat offenders or whatever, for soil erosion or whatever, is there any, like, repercussions for that, or?
Yeah, so what would happen is that we'll give a soil erosion notice, and that would make the producer responsible for any cleanup of the ditch. We don't want to see culverts filled in. So what's happening is we're having those conversations and we're not having to give out the notice. People are just agreeing to comply to that. We don't allow the producer themselves to clean the ditch out because they may alter the flow, water flow. So they're hiring a contractor.
Okay.
And the only case where we'd let them is if they're a farmer and a contractor.
Okay.
So that's happened. So.
Sounds good.
Rick?
Yeah, thank you. One field I was involved in, they've had trouble in the past, and actually immediately after the crop was off, we floated oats onto it, and it's holding 100% this spring. It's not much, but it germinates so much faster than planted oats, and it's something that you could add to the book as very, very effective on late season trying to get a hold on the land.
Yeah, we saw producers were very quick to react. In 2021, we had all north of the river was blowing, and it was often the corn that had been silaged, and then they went and worked the corn, and that just made it sort of loamy, and that was the stuff that started to blow. But the feedlots have done a really good job of using cover crops. It's been incredible the amount of use of cover crops, and just changing the farming practices a little bit for now.
I'd also like to mention that I've noticed too that it's not necessarily just potato ground too. It's any row crop like corn, silage, or even beans and beets too.
Yeah.
It's can be an issue because once one field starts, all the other ones start. It seems like after that. So.
Absolutely, for sure. The sugar beet growers, I think there's a little bit of a credit if you seed a cover crop in the spring. So we've seen cover crops with the sugar beets growing. There's barley or whatever they've grown up along the edges to hold that, and then when they go in and they'll spray Roundup to take care of the Roundup ready beets. So that works good too.
Currently, the federal government has a rebate on cover crops if they work with their local agronomists and have to sign off on the program. So most guys can get anywhere from a third to up to 40% of that policy covered if they work with their agronomists.
No, and that's a good point, and I think Rob Dunn will speak a little bit on that later on today as well. So.
And so with that, would it be okay to put something in the magazines that we have?
Yeah, we have
This is a possibility?
Yeah, so one thing we're working on this summer is an educational video to promote good practices when it comes to soil erosion, and that'll be out in the fall. So the videos that we're putting out are very well received, and folks are watching them. So that's the route, and we can also put it in our newsletter as well.
Lauren?
Gary, when you talked about potatoes, it seems to be the biggest difference between the potato growers is the ones who have the what do you call it, the machines that cut off the foliage before they harvest the potatoes. Their land seems to blow a bit more than the guys who leave the vines on top of the ground and work the vines in. I know you can't control what kind of machinery they use, but there's a difference between the farming practices that makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. In this video that we're going to put out, we're actually going to reach out to a few producers, the ones that are being successful, and we're going to promote those. We don't want to promote the negative. So just, try to steer them the right way on things that can be done. A lot of them do know it anyways. It's just the expense of new equipment and things like that.
Dan? Oh, Jeremy?
Well, just a friendly reminder to make sure for everyone that you have your mics on. So, I mean, the meeting is recorded, and lots of times the voices are blurred a little bit. So, I mean, this is great discussion on this as well. Just to add a little bit further to that as well, I mean, obviously the PGA is a big, is the largest association in the area for the potato growers. And we can also look into some advertising that we can do in conjunction with them that comes through our website, so that we can actually make sure that soil conservation portion is right at the forefront of the conversation. Especially now with the recent announcement of the expansion of the McCain's plant and $600 million expansion in that aspect. And from what we've heard from McCain's, that involves basically 2 potato processing lines. So I would expect there will be a enormous increase in the number of potato fields in the general area in the next X amount of years to meet that demand.
Okay, so with that, of course, Tabor is a big part of that too, the county of Tabor. Could we work in conjunction with them that we come up with the same message?
We are working with the MD of Tabor on that soil erosion video. And we are also have reached out to the Potato Growers Association as well. So we hope to put those messages out.
But if, you said earlier, if the potato guys aren't the issue, like, should we have more education towards guys growing corn or whatever? More focus?
Well, I think producers have been very quick to react. The corn growers have certainly adapted with those cover crops. So it's, or manure. Problem is some of these crops you don't have a lot of time to react. Sugar beets in particular coming off last. There's nothing that's going to come up on a sugar beet crop. Same
with corn, actually.
Yeah. So what's happening there is the producer often waits for the first time it blows, and he goes, okay, I'm going to have a problem. And then they put manure on. And like Claus said, they are getting permission from the NRCB, and you'll see it putting on frozen ground. Moving on. So we can't control when it's going to blow or what the conditions are going to be. We do inspect and look at all instances of soil erosion, and if they're severe enough, we're making a lot of phone calls. We've got a long list from the last 2 years of who we talk to. When we see the repeats, then it's a little stiffer conversation, but everybody's been very, very receptive here. There's been lots of conversations, and even last week, a little instance on River Ridge Road there too. We've contacted that producer as well, and just even the small spots we'd like to get under control. ASB resolutions. So at the conference in January in Grand Prairie, delegates, they addressed 14 resolutions. 1 did not pass. The rest of them were carried forward. I've included the draft minutes of the resolution session attached, and I think it's much easier to read the minutes than to attend a resolution session sometimes. It's ongoing. These resolutions are changed, just the odd word. It's a very cumbersome process. So read the package there, and you'll get a gist of what happened there. There were a couple resolutions that are of particular interest to Lethbridge County. I mean, there's a bunch of them that were of interest, but 2 was 823. It was consideration of municipal, environmental, and agriculture policies for large-scale solar and related energy developments on agricultural lands. That's a long title. That one was sponsored by the County of Warner. They've had problems with weeds. Vulcan County's had lots of issue with weeds and soil erosion up by Travers when they stripped the land. We'll deal with that one a little bit later. Hillary's going to come in and discuss from a development how we can address that prior to them happening. In the last couple of weeks, I've been in contact with the contractor that is taking care of these sites in the county. We haven't had we've had minimal problems. We've had people phone with concern that there's going to be weeds, but the weeds have been taken care of. There's plans to seed grass, and they've sprayed. A quarter section of those windmills takes about a day and a half to spray. So that, in our county, they've left enough room to get into the rows, so that's a benefit. In some places, that's not possible, so they're having a ton of issues. So far, we've been good.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the RMA convention, there was tremendous amount of talk about windmills and solar energy projects. And the biggest thing that everybody is in favor of is not to have it on prime agricultural land anymore. It should be directed to marginal land, and if they need substations there, they should be put there instead of wasting valuable agricultural land. So whether or not the government will kind of listen to that or not, that's hard to say. But currently, I might as well finish the story, I guess. The counties or any municipality's land use bylaw may exclude the use of prime agricultural land, but the Alberta Utilities and Energy, the AUC, yeah, they will overrule it and will allow them to go ahead and do it. So there was a lot of complaints about that fact.
Actually, we had one case like that in the county itself.
We did,
Yeah.
yes.
And that's why you're seeing the farmers and producers coming through the Ag Service Board, because it's that they've got a problem with it being on the prime agricultural land, and that's why these resolutions are coming through here. And in the county of Warner, with the weeds, they had to go out there and they had kids weed whipping for days and days to take care of the weed issues once it was too late. Our intention is to keep ahead of this as much as we can. In talking with the contractors out there, they've got the same goal that we have. Often these companies they don't know anything about weeds, so it's an educational process from both contractors and ourselves. With ourselves, if it ever got to the point the weeds became an issue and it's a weed that's on the Weed Act, that we would give them a weed notice very, very quickly to keep ahead of that, so they know that they have some, they got to take care of those concerns. Moving on, another one that was of interest is Resolution 923, synthetic fertilizer emissions, and Rob Dunn's going to come in and speak a little bit on that as well. That was brought up at a council meeting, and so we forwarded some information on to the meeting here. So, roadside seating, the county ASB takes care of all the shoulder poles and road construction, and that all that work is dependent on how much work the construction crew does. So about 14 to 17 miles over the next few years is what is anticipated. We also seeded the Rackus pit last year. We seeded it very, very late because there was no moisture in the spring. It come up like a golf course. We thought we were doing good. We forgot about it for a while, went back a month and a half later, and it's a weed problem too. So we did have to spray it. We're going to have to really keep an eye on that one. So, rental equipment. We have a couple Brilliant drill seeders that we rent out. In the past 10 years, we've been getting about $2,000 for revenue. Revenue has increased over the last 5 since we've got a couple new ones. Last year's we had $3,000 worth of revenue. The rental rates are going to go up to $7 an acre with a minimum charge of $210. We just got to keep up with inflation ourselves. Farm plastic. There's been an increase in the county on that. There's a program for silage plastic now. We're helping clean farms a little bit, organize routes for where they can go pick up plastic from producers. There's people adding on all the time. We don't have a big role. It's just they don't know the producers, so we're trying to organize that so more plastic gets recycled. Skunk, raccoon, and magpie traps, they're always busy. Someone phoned for a magpie trap the other day, and they're all out already. So we did suspend magpie traps during the avian flu outbreak. We did have 2 outbreaks of avian flu in the county. They basically give me a call and give me a heads up. It's in your county. They don't give you the location. But we hold off till they've cleaned those places up. It takes a long time to clean those barns. So we did anticipate a larger use of the Brilliant drills in 2022. It's just drought conditions, early spring. Nobody wanted to seed grass. It was the exact same thing for us, so we held off there. Parks, part of the ASB program as well. I felt sorry for the youngster that had to go out and mow last spring. He'd come back very, very dusty and dirty. We're thankful for it did rain in June to make things a little nicer out there. And of course, increased effort was needed after that. We don't have a lot of playgrounds that have irrigation, so we do monthly playground inspections for both playgrounds and trail systems. Trail systems is a couple times a year, but it's important to keep these playgrounds safe for the children out there. Cemeteries, they're mowed usually twice a year. Sometimes the second round, it doesn't seem like it needs it. We hit the first round usually the beginning of July, first week of July or second week of July, so they're the last things we get to once we caught up on everything else. So Monarch, they received a major playground upgrade in May, June of last year, very well received by the community. We basically took everything out except one swing set and put in a whole new play unit for the kids. It's gone from virtually no use to incredible use of the playground. This year we're doing a larger project even in Shaughnessy with the court area and a new playground. We're going to see a big increase in usage there as well. So our maintenance of parks depends, of course, if it rains or not. We were pretty well right on budget with that, a little bit under. Monarch capital project last year, we were within $1,000 of the budget, which we're happy there. It come on, bang on. Shaughnessy being a little bigger project and inflation, we do intend to become on that project under budget. The Community Association has received a grant that gives us a little bit of a buffer, but we're trying to stick to near close to the initial number. Farm family, Calgary Stampede, BMO Farm family. This year is the Nickel family, and they have a dairy farm in the Kip Colehurst area. Very deserving family there. Been around a long time. Farm safety.
Just one moment. On that, the family farm BMO awards, next year, I think we decided like we were going to put an application out, or that people can nominate people, and that the county itself doesn't have to do that anymore, because it just probably looks better if the community comes forward doing that.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out a way to do that then. Moving on, farm safety. So a $5,000 donation to the Farm Safety Center was created a few years back from the ASB budget, and they've taught kids on the importance of safety to 649 students in the county, and that report is attached. We're not going to go through it, but you can read a little more on that if you want. Other activities, Lethbridge County, we took part in the following events. Ag Expo, we've been going there for probably 10 years. Nice to see it up and running at a little fuller steam this year than last year. Farming Smarter, we set up a booth there. We had our extension fellow go over there and man the booth. We hosted a farmer pesticide course in partnership with Hammond Research. We do that every year if needed, and it's a 5-year cycle on renewal for those, so from now on they're going to be busy. We had 27 folks attend. Most of them were from the county. So of course some of us went to the South Region Conference that was held in the Crow's Nest Pass in October, and then we also attended the Ag Service Board Conference in Grand Prairie in January. You have any, Claus, any comments on the conference and what you thought there?
You mean on the ASB one?
The ASB conference in Grand Prairie.
Well, the ASB conference, I think we had a great conference there, and Ken from Farmer Smarter was there, our new board member for the ASB board, and Dan Chapman. And talking to them afterwards, they really appreciated the being on there and getting a lot of knowledge from that, and especially in the work that they're both in. And we hope to see like Logan in here next year, because then next year we're going to have it in Lethbridge then for the first time in the new facilities here. And but further in, and with the resolutions and everything that came forward. I thought it was very educational, and we had good contacts, and some of the good contacts that we have is with the evening before, like with the ministers and so forth. You get so much contact because these people are willing to listen, because it's agriculture, and Alberta is agriculture, and that's just one of the main things that are happening here in the province. And further, the social aspect of with each other, getting to know your other municipalities and what they're doing and how it's working for them. And I think it's a really good. Maybe John or Dan wants to have a couple of comments on that yet, or.
Sure, I would concur. I think the structured part of the convention was very good. But second to that was just the interaction with the other municipalities in terms of bouncing ideas off of what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and getting that understanding in between municipalities and the communication, the cooperation from them, because as we all know, we're not an island here. We're bordered by other municipalities that have similar issues and similar problems. I would concur that the solar arrays on prime arable land or prime farmland was definitely a topic of discussion, and is something that is going to be more prevalent as time goes on, and coming up with a very succinct and targeted program to make sure that we're in line with what our needs are from the standpoint of agriculture and food safety is definitely going to be important.
Okay, thank you.
And just a note, we're hoping the conference is going to be in Lethbridge. We are still negotiating. Nothing has been signed yet. But
It hasn't been signed?
Not yet.
Because you were pretty adamant that it was going to be there. That's why I thought I'd say that.
Oh,
Spoiler alert.
no, we've been working with them for quite some time on signing something. Hopefully, you're going to see something over the next 2 weeks. It's
Because I think what they're planning on, the opening, I think it's around the 20th or whatever of June. And, but we had last week, Thursday, after a council meeting, we had a tour there, and there's a lot of work to be done yet. Yeah.
There are some concerns from our board who's deciding where it's going to be and working with them on those types of things. We've been assured that we can figure out all these blips, but either we're going to sign something and get it done over 2 weeks, or it's not going to be here. I've been adamant. Our full intention was for this to be in Lethbridge, and I'm one vote on the committee, and I've been obviously Lethbridge. That's the only one in my mind. I don't want to go anywhere else, because that was the intention.
John?
So, question for you: when you say we're in discussions with them, who is them? Is
The exhibition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a hold up on.
So did they come with other suggestions then? If Lethbridge didn't work, were they talking about different?
Yes, there have been.
This in their area, of course, because I mean it's huge advertising for what they are doing, what they have. Yeah.
Yeah, there's discussion on other areas. The holdup is pricing. We're come to the point we need to know what things are costs, and just because they're new, they've hired new contractors. The pricing's been a holdup, and usually we don't let things go this long. COVID has created. We're signed up and we're ready to go a year and a half to 2 years in advance. We put down whatever, $10,000 usually to host it at a hotel, but COVID has slowed things up, and then with the exhibition bringing on new contractors, that slowed things down a little bit from their end. So, moving on to resource management program. So the majority of the work done in here is done by our rural extension specialist. That's Matthew Wells. EFP program, we're seeing a big upsurge in environmental farm program. 20 dairy producers and sugar beet producers have went through the program since August. More and more of the producer groups are requiring that their producers have an environmental farm plan. Dairy guys have to do it, and often it's done last minute because they're busy. There's a lot of things on their mind. So I'm moving on to CAP program, Canadian Agriculture Partnership. That ends right away, and there's going to be a new one. It's sustainable. Same thing, just sustainable on the front of that. We're promoting that through social media. Off CAP, on farm. What does anybody know the word on that one? I should have put it in there, but it's anyway, we'll move on with the Rob Dunn is going to speak a little bit on that today, and we continue to promote their programs as well. County newsletter, we're putting that out 3 times a year. It has been well received. We're getting some feedback from producers and folks that like to read it. We'd like anybody's feedback as well, and we put out a survey at Ag Expo, and there's been a survey through the newsletter on what folks would like to see as well.
Are you one of the people that put that one together?
We have a working group. We get together and discuss what we want in it, and Matthew makes it happen. And he works with Maddie here at the office, and they do a really good job putting that out. It's very well received. The issue is it's a ton of work, and we put deadlines. Everything in that newsletter, except for a couple articles, are submitted. People have other things to do, and they're not often submitting everything on time, so it's a real headache when it comes to the deadline, and we're having to push back when the newsletters are put out. So well, hopefully we can convince people to get them in a little bit earlier. Once again, here's the leafy spurge video. So Matthew was the head on that one, and do watch the video, and you can see that our partners that we work with there, Ag Research, and also the city were part of that as well. Moving on, the fall ag tour for college and university students. So that was organized and went to the McCain facility. I attended on the one day with the university, and McCain's were so gracious in hosting us. They probably had 5 or 6 staff members available for half a day to show us through the plant and talk to the students about everything. The students had lots of questions, and that's an incredible facility, and it'll be interesting when it doubles in size, I guess. So well received there. Floating islands, we continue to promote those a little bit at Broxburn Park. We've got them in the water ponds there.
Coming back to the fall ag tour, is there any plans in place for our community? Or are you coming to that?
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that shortly. So other presentations, there was kind of an ag day at Huntsville School in Iron Springs. Matthew worked with the Birds of Prey. They brought in a couple birds kids could see. Clean Farms was there, delivering on the plastic. Ag for Life and Farm Safety Center. This was very well received in Iron Springs. I went and took in all the presentations, and you're going to see more of those. It's good to reach out to the students and promote agriculture. Iron Springs is a very rural community. All the kids out there, they know what we're talking about when it comes to agriculture. Most of them live on farms. So Clean Farms here are coordinating that monthly collection of silage and bale wrap plastic. In Farm Republic, we continue to do monthly What's That Bug and What's That Weed on social media. You'll see that again this year. Old Man River Mainstream Watershed Group. We'll have a meeting down at the river bottom in September. We talk about Matt brings in various speakers to talk. Crop reporting that's done once a month. Climatic impact report that's done monthly as well. And then we have the off-stream watering system that's down at the Little Bow across from the Rackus gravel pit. We put the off-stream water on there usually every year. Last year it didn't go out. The person that held the lease decided that it was, the grass, there wasn't enough grass there to do that, so he left it rest for the year. So upcoming, like I mentioned, the soil erosion video that's coming up. We're going to work with the County of Newell, the MD of Tabor, the NRCB, and Alberta Agriculture, and various other producers and likely producer groups as well. Shelter Matthew Belt workshop, that's next week. We've got quite a few people signed up for that. That's going to be out in the county between Coaldale and Lethbridge on a site there. And ag tour, here's what we're talking here. We've been looking at various ways to host an ag tour. It's a big expense and a lot of work. What we intend to do this year is maybe have a field day on the south side of the river in the Broxburn Park, and we're going to bring in various speakers to speak for a couple hours. Not all the speakers have been organized yet. That's kind of the way we're going. And next year, our plan, if this works out, is to do the same thing on the north side of the river, and sites we're looking at on the north side are Prairie Tractor Club or something like that. We'll bring in speakers and hopefully some demonstrations and make it interesting. With anything, the costs have gone up to host those, and the biggest impact is busing.
Yeah, thank you. Who's the target audience for the ag tour?
We're going to be working with a few groups, but there's going to be a presentation. One of them is going to be on those floating islands because it's right there. We're hoping to also bring in a speaker to speak on kochia, resistance, what to do with kochia, and then there's a few others. Alberta Bats is one that Matt's working with. We're trying to make it for producers, and our objective is always to have Lethbridge County producers take part. It's very difficult to get folks out any time of the year. We're going to see how it goes, and then see what people want us to talk about.
Because the last one that we had was 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought it was like we had 2 buses full of the county members and council. Plus we had buses from the college follow us to all of those. And I thought it was very well received. And the comments I heard afterwards that some people said the county should do them more often because this was really worthwhile.
Yep, and then COVID got in the way after that. Just the impact of the pricing on our budget is why we're going to something smaller, where everybody can drive to the site. And it's kind of meant to be interactive, where you meet some different folks from different sectors of agriculture. As far as the college goes and university, we're organizing those tours separately. Matthew will go down to the riparian area and work with them and do a private tour. Some of the comments we got back, the students it didn't mingle very well with the producers sometimes, and it was a big crowd. So,
Yeah,
And
well,
Jeremy.
on that about the added cost and some of these items that producers are already very well aware of, to bring them out and haul them through a floating island tour that they have no interest in. I could see that it's not a big ticket item for the average producer to spend a day in their summer and listen on some of these things. So I could well see it not being scaled up much, if at all, for that target anyway.
yeah, no, there'll be different speakers each time, and some of the subject matter has gotten old. We're trying, we'd go down to the riparian area every year. I'm not sure how interesting that was to some folks. They wouldn't come 2 years in a row if that's what you're presenting on. We're trying to keep it fresh. And the biggest thing, we decide we're going to have this little field day. There's other producer groups that are having field days. We had to stay out of the way, and it's very busy. So you have, within a week on each end, other areas having these tours. How many of these tours are people going to go to? Like, maybe it's something we leave to them. So,
Jeremy?
This is great conversation. Making notes as far as all the feedback. One thing I think is probably one thing we kind of discussed at one of the previous ASB committee meetings, and what we wanted to line up for January was more of a strategic discussion about what this committee as a whole was going to advocate for, and where some strategic direction could be placed. And I think that's probably where a lot of these conversations could end up, is if we do an ASB workshop or something to that extent, and then we get some direction from the committee as a whole about what kind of direction they want a bunch of these pieces to take.
Thank you. Warren?
Yeah, just a quick question. When you said you might do it at Broxburn Park, where would you have room to have a speaker?
We have it along the pond, and we'd work out parking with one of the owners. There's a couple open lots very close. We're hoping. We haven't organized anything, but it would be a very short deal. We're talking 2 hours and a light lunch, and that would be it. So there's plenty of room. We're not anticipating a big turnout. We're hoping for 20 to 40, probably closer to the bottom end, and we don't want to put a big expense into this. So, but like Jeremy said, we'll be working with the SB committee on what they want to see. Maybe that's not a priority. We'll work on what we're good at and go that way, or whatever the priorities that you guys put forward.
Bill?
Just put in that I'm working with Maple Leaf to try to get them to sponsor the lunch by Lethbridge Heritage Fork
Okay.
as the product.
Great, thank you.
And then we may take care of the cooking ourselves or work something out there. So,
We got enough barbecues.
yeah. Moving on, so you're going to see those presentations at R.A. Baker School. That's coming up in May. Those are the same type of deal that was held in Iron Springs. As well, scheduled presenters already include Grant Collings. That's our tree guy. He's going to be doing the tree workshop next week. A couple of folks from the Blood Tribe, they'll be presenting on how they take care of weeds and issues like that. And then Alberta Bats. And any additional speakers. If you have a suggestion, let me know. We're open to anything there. So level of service on our extension activities. Most grant targets for this stream have been met. COVID-19 still impacting if people want to go out and take in some of these workshops. So we haven't had the annual tour. This year, resource management last year was under budget. We anticipate that we're going to meet that budget this year. We have a lot of things that are planned. And that is my report.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gary, for this report. It was a pretty long report this time. And are there any questions for Gary that we want to have? If not, John?
I was just gonna move that we accept it for information.
Okay. Everybody in favor? Okay, that's carried. Then we're going to have Rob here at 10:15 by the looks of it. So,
I think we can move on to the terms of reference.
yeah, we can do a little bit of that, I guess. Okay. What page is that?
That would be page 64 to 70.
Okay. Yeah, right here.
No, I mean,
Oh, the page, no.
no, I mean, you have to log up as the PDF, not the agenda. Because it does work in the agenda.
Okay.
For us, yeah.
Okay.
For council.
Yep.
Zoom in on your screen. We'll see it.
That's not what it used to be.
You need to make that way bigger if you want me to read it.
Just wait. Yeah, it's gonna get worse.
Yeah.
We say 60, 62?
There we go.
Better.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, our terms of reference. This is a fairly new document, come in a couple of years ago. We didn't intend to look at it again so soon, but we changed the configuration of the board. So there's some changes that are come in on this document, and we will go to that document and I'll focus on a few areas.
So for previous, or for new committee members, we passed a new ASB bylaw earlier this year, or sorry, in 2022, which established the council, or the committee as 4 members of council, plus 3 members at large from the community and the public. So that is why we have new committee members, which is fantastic to see. As part of that, initially we had passed the bylaw, and then in reference to that, the terms of reference would need to be adjusted, because previously the terms of reference basically said that we had 7 council members to be appointed by, or it was the whole of council was the ASB committee. So that is hence why we're bringing the terms of reference back around.
All right, we'll just go over this quite quickly. Of course, we're learning all about the Ag Service Board and our purpose. Alan will be here later to speak on that. Our scope, it comes from the Ag Service Board Act, and those points in there, that's directly from the Agriculture Service Board Act, which gives us our duties. So the official formation, this is where it covers how the group is formed and what makes up the group. A combination of both council and members at large. And the portion I'd like to focus on here is the committee chair will be appointed by county council at the annual organizational meeting, so that takes place in October. The vice chair can be appointed by the ASB committee. All members of the ASB committee are voting members. The county reeve is an ex officio non-voting member, and voting members for the regional and provincial resolution balloting purposes will be appointed along with a designated alternate at the annual organizational meeting. So what that means for this year is what we'd like to do for the chair. Claus has been appointed for this year. In the September Ag Service Board meeting, we will take suggestions on who would like to be the chair, and we'll present that to council at the organizational meeting, and we'll also appoint the vice chair, and then it can be taken forward to council as well. So we have to think about who wants to be the chair and how we're going to move forward, and nominations will be at that September meeting. Also, the voting members for the resolutions doesn't have to be the chair or the vice chair. Those we're going to have to appoint those in September, and who will be taking care of those. And it doesn't, like I say, have to be the chair or the vice chair, but it should be people that are willing to go to the conferences, both the South Region and the Provincial Conference, and sit through a resolution session that can last quite a few hours. So.
Now for process, the way this essentially works is, or the way we're proposing this is basically at the September ASB committee meeting, this group nominates who they are going to have for these positions, and that goes to council for that to be essentially ratified.
That was just what I was going to discuss and ask, because it was my understanding on this, that this is a recommendation board to council. But when we're dealing with the vice chair, in terms of reference, it says the vice chair is appointed annually by the ASB committee. So how do I want to word that? Thinking along the lines of how this organizational work goes, the vice chair would be, the recommendation is actually what is being put forth to council, that the ASB committee is recommending both the chair and the vice chair, or the ASB committee is appointing the vice chair?
It would be appointing the vice chair and recommending the chair. They can decide to or not to go forward with our recommendation on the chair. I think it would be, with the floor of council sitting on the ASB committee, it should be just natural that they would approve that. So the goals and objectives, that's set out by the ASB committee, and that's where the level of service comes in. And we will go through my report in the fall, and we'll be taking suggestions on what you've seen and what I present on level of service. It's important to do the level of service at that time because budget comes up very quickly, and we must remember that anything that we do has an impact on the budget. So more or less, either way, it impacts. So we have a couple meetings a year, and this is the first one in the spring, and usually the second one happens in the fall. So are there any questions on the terms of reference?
I guess if not, can I have a mover to recommend this to the county council for approval? John?
So moved.
Anybody, any questions? If not, everybody in favor? That's carried. Okay, then we'll move on. We're going to have, is Rob here?
Maybe we just have a quick recess here.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, a quick break, and then 10:15 we resume the meeting. Oh, he's there, okay. do it for Rob and Alan at the same time then, because we're both here, if it's in case people, I think most of the people know Alan, but, you can't miss Alan, he's the nicest guy ever.
I'm Alan, as Class said, and my last name is Efetha. I work for the provincial government, ASB program.
Okay, Rob, you want to introduce yourself a minute?
Yeah, so Rob Dunn, and my wife and I have a company, Farmwise. We just work out of our home here in Lethbridge. I do consulting work for, there was a group of farmers, they helped them get started. They were on the bleeding edge of no-till, and a bunch of guys like Lanier, some of your neighbors, but a few from the county of Lethbridge. When I was retiring, or say graduating from Alberta Agriculture in 2014, they said, come and work with us, Rob. So I helped them kind of coordinate some of their research, some of their project work. It's a peer support group, 18 guys from across the southern region. That they're all smarter than me, keep me on my toes.
Okay.
Most farmers are a lot smarter than me.
Okay, can we quickly, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Can we
And so then-
quickly go around a minute, that way everybody knows?
Yeah.
Start with you, Bill?
Yep.
We'll go the other way.
Bill, Environmental Services Manager. This is like Alberta Agriculture reunion.
Long time ago.
Okay, Dan?
Dan Chapman, just member at large.
Warren Hickey, Division 1 Counselor.
Eric Van Hessen, Division 5 Counselor.
Klaus Vanderveen, Division 6.
John Curvis, Division 4.
William Miller, member at large.
And Candace refuses to say that, so.
She's busy.
Everybody's on Director of Operations.
Okay, so, yeah, so Rob, the chair is yours there.
Hello.
And if you be so friendly to turn on your mic, and staff will help you get
Good,
going.
okay. So I've been doing a bit of consulting work with the RDAR over the last, really it was about 10 months ago. The person that's coordinating the off-calf delivery for RDAR had called and said, you know, she needed some help kind of, in particular with the nitrogen management and the cover cropping related programming. And so I got kind of involved there initially. I never quite thought I would still be doing that consulting work with RDAR through the winter months, but you know, they've kind of retained me just to some of the hard questions that come in on things like cover cropping, some of the nitrogen management stuff. And then I've helped with some of the meetings in the south just to take some pressure off. Of course, the RDAR staff are pretty much, you know, trying to get all of the approvals done here with the programming as it rolls out for the spring. And so I think I was looking at some of the, just even some of the information that the county has put out and the great information that you've put out even in the last summer and fall on the program, off-calf program. So you're probably pretty familiar, but I'll kind of talk a little bit first what RDAR, what does that stand for? I think you folks know that. Ken Coles, I know, is on your board as well. He knows RDAR all too well.
He's in a better place right now.
He is in a better place. Yeah, we're kind of following Ken. I'm on the Farming Smarter board as an agronomist as well. So, yeah. He didn't want me to go in his place. So, yeah, just kind of a description of RDAR. What RDAR principally does is they deliver that federal CAP funding. So we've got SCAP coming out, but the CAP funding on an annual basis, as well as Alberta Agriculture funding for research. And so that is a competitive process, you know, organizations applying for that. They also took on that $33 million on-farm climate action fund, which is something quite different for RDAR, but so that meant that they kind of had to sort of develop the program delivery side of that, but that $33 million over 2 years for off-calf. Off-calf is the government of Canada providing funding to support BMP adoption, and we'll talk about that a bit more, but it's related to greenhouse gas and to a certain extent in terms of resiliency for on-farm operations in terms of coping with weather and climate. Those three categories: nitrogen, cover cropping, and rotational grazing. So I'll just mention that there's a number of other delivery agents, if we'll call it. So RDAR is just one. Canal Council is delivering related to nitrogen management in canola. And there's a number of others like EcoCert and the Canadian Grasslands and Forage Association are delivering, you know, for more rotational grazing. And the EcoCert kind of one is, it's a really quite a good program for, especially for farmers that, you know, organic farmers, for example, would be taking advantage of that one. Details, this is one of the frustrations for all the farmers I work with. Very few are eligible because it, you know, I mean, they're supporting adoption of new practice. I mean, a lot of these programs, whether it's offsets or these programs are looking at supporting, in a sense, kind of new practice, new to farm, new to field. Yes, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that definition of new, just because it's new to an area, or is it new to North America, or 100-year-old practice that is getting reintroduced? I could see it's a
Yeah.
very subjective term on that and
Yeah.
challenging.
Yep. So it would be something that the farmer isn't currently doing is sort of the concept of kind of new practice. So in other words, if you were applying nitrogen, if you were banding your nitrogen, you wouldn't qualify for an incentive to, you know, to band your fertilizer kind of thing. Yep.
Logan?
Oh, no, me. Okay. So this is new to the farmer then?
It would be new to the farm or new to the field. So they sort of broadened that to say that if you, say, taking on, you know, more rental land that was new to you, then in a sense it kind of qualifies on that basis.
Okay, I can understand the frustration with that, because if you're a good producer, then you're already taking
Yeah.
in all your best practices.
Yes, yeah. And so these programs are always to try to increase adoption of those good practices that in many cases, many of you would already be doing. And so there's a maximum grant that is across all of the delivery partners over the 2 years of the program, 75 grand. So it is fairly generous in you know, in terms of if you're eligible for the program. 85%. So in other words, you need to spend a bit more than 75 to get the whole amount. Minimum project or application of 2,500. So some of those other delivery partners can, you know, you can be under that. So smaller acreages, organic producers kind of fit there. Now there's no payment for in-kind, and we'll explain that a little bit more, but really what it does is it covers things like seed or, you know, covers ingredients in the case of nitrogen, but not for the application of those necessarily, you're not your in-kind. So it does cover the costs, and it also requires that you have, it requires that you have a certified crop advisor or a PAG that recommends that practice. In other words, you need, you know, as an applicant, I would need to get a PAG or a CCA to, you know, work with me to say that, yes, that is a good practice for your farm. That is a requirement that Ag Canada put on this. They wanted, you know, the practices to be agronomically or from a grazing management point of view to make sense. And so then, as a professional agrologist, you know, then a number of the farmers that are applying have my name on the bottom that says, yes, I've looked at this. I'm not signing it per se, but there is an expectation that I've looked at it and it makes sense from a technical perspective. This just changed yesterday, so I've, you know, to emphasize that, I've crossed it out. I think the idea was approval before implementation. I think after what I've been told yesterday is that project implementation can start and can be invoiced after April 1st, but of course for those that haven't heard back with an approval, you know, by now, then they're kind of on their own if it doesn't get approved, right? So, but this was a little bit of a, I mean, I'll just be honest with you that the RDAR staff are just, I mean, there's 600 plus applications that have hit the queue here in the last 4 weeks. And they're working, there's a process in terms of working through those, and they're trying to, in a sense, try to look at those ones in the south and try to put a priority on those. But ultimately, it's sort of, you know, kind of like chronological, and maybe they're kind of cheating a little bit for some of these ones to say, you know, these ones in the south we recognize we're going to get in the field sooner than others. But they're saying that initially the thing was, oh, you need approval before you even start. Now they're saying you can start, but just recognize as an applicant that it may not be approved if they run out of funds or if there's something technically that it's ineligible. Just on some of the example here, cover crop, seed costs covered for appropriate species, and again, the recommendation there. It covers the planting costs, but only custom or equipment rental. So in other words, if you were doing something where you were having to get custom or equipment, it would cover that. Cover crops underseeded with the main crop or seeded at harvest. So we're talking about, in our special crop plan would be the classic example down here. So the idea, the principle that Ag Canada has in this is that sufficient time for getting minimum 6 inches of growth. Now, that's not always going to be possible, but so we'll say that's kind of aspirational for some of our post-harvest cover. Grazing in probably a lot of the province is a big part of this. So certainly in the south here where someone's underseeding silage and it's, if they haven't been doing that as a routine practice, they would qualify to put some species under that silage. It grows in the fall, you graze it. The idea is that 6-inch rule of thumb, manage it to have cover going into the winter. And those covers can be grazed even the following spring and even taken for silage, but it wouldn't cover things like grain production, for like winter wheat or rag for grain production. This is another one, I'll just mention it, some of the farmers, especially in central Alberta where they're dedicating that annual cropland to a season-long grazing mix. It covers those species that extend that grazing mix into the late summer and fall. It doesn't cover the spring cereals they'd put in to graze, but it covers the other species in that mix that extend that into the season. So there's always a long list of things that aren't. So just following on that, things like the spring cereals or peas in a full season grazing mix. This has been a kind of a point of controversy. Agriculture Canada, with the program, they were looking at more kind of cover and soil benefits, not so much grazing. But full season grazing is possible, just that they're not covering those spring crops. They get that initial biomass, just the ones that are coming later in the season.
So with that, we talked about the rotational grazing, but how about the pasture land and
Yes.
things like that? They are not going to rip up their pasture land. I mean, they're never going to
No.
get it going again.
No. This would be instances where they're dedicating an annual cropland for additional pastures. So it's kind of like in the soil health community, the soil health gurus, they talk about having a dedicated year once in for example, where you're using that for, rotational grazing within the annual crop phase kind of thing. And so there's a lot of interest in that. Not so much down in the south here. There's some, but most of this is probably up in central Alberta where the seed companies are selling these mixes that they put in the spring and then they rotationally graze that through the summer. And part of that mix can be covered by off-calf. I'm going to skip over some of this, but swath grazing isn't covered, only for those species that would be underseeded to extend that through the fall and into the spring. Corn for grazing isn't eligible. That's been caused some hard feelings. Winter cereals planted for grain production isn't eligible, but if it was used for spring forage, that's fine. And no cost for termination, no fertilizer protection costs. So that's cover crop. Again, moving pretty quickly. I can leave these slides with you, Gary, to distribute if you like afterwards.
Yeah,
And
I was
management-
just gonna ask
Yeah.
whether or not you
Yeah.
could
Yeah, I'll
actually have this presentation emailed to us.
send a PDF, yeah, okay, yeah. And management is a big area, and probably the lion's share of the funding is gonna be to end management and rotational grazing, which we'll talk about. And management would be covering for mapping and soil testing, tissue testing as well, when we get into the summer. So it covers up to $300 per field for custom sampling and analysis. If someone's sampling themselves, then it would be covering the cost of the analysis. But certainly for someone to go out and do the sampling. Again, this whole concept of new to field kind of applies here. If you've sampled in the last few years, then to qualify, then it has to be more intensive sampling. So if we're doing zone sampling or sampling to a greater
With the
depth,
$300 per field, what are you referring to? Like,
that would be to have someone come out and do the custom sampling and analysis. which is sort of about what most
So
of
it
the
doesn't matter
outfits-
what size the field is?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Soil mapping and testing, so for variable rate nitrogen, up to $8 an acre for that. And again, there's been pretty big uptake on that one for sure. Normally that starts in the fall, so we may be out of money by the time we get to the fall. There's some applications in the spring, I think, but has to be at least a minimum of 12-inch, which sort of like we would hardly think of not sampling to at least a foot in the south, but it's amazing, a lot of the province only samples to 6-inch depth. And then tissue testing. This other one is, so if the principal approach is to broadcast nitrogen, then the program will pay rental or custom to ban fertilizer up to $15,000 per farm. So again, that one, you're not getting anything for the fertilizer in these programs. You're sort of saying they'll cover the cost, but not the in-kind, but you would have to get someone to do that for you. It does likewise cover split applying nitrogen. So again, rental or custom only. So if someone is applying most of their fertilizer, all their fertilizer up front before seeding, this would cover the cost of that application afterwards. Now for fertigating, that's pretty hard to cost that out, but one of the things that's been suggested in the future, if we were trying to incent something like fertigation, then we would have to have like a cost per acre or something like that. But right now, it just doesn't fit for a lot of our irrigation. But certainly if someone wanted to move some of that nitrogen into the post-emergent crop window, which can be an advantage, especially for corn and longer season crops, but even for our cereals, if we can put, some of that before, say, gross, GS 31. Some of the farmers I work with do that to help with efficiency. That would be eligible. Inhibitors are a big part of what Ag Canada would like to see. They only include dual inhibitors, which is so fertilizer stabilizers or what we're calling inhibitors here reduce. You apply it to the fertilizer granule or to the UAN solution, and it reduces the losses of ammonia. So a urease inhibitor reduces the losses of ammonia. And then there's another part to that, which is a nitrification inhibitor, which reduces the conversion of ammonium to nitrate. Ag Canada has dug in their heels on this one. They said we're only going to fund where people use dual inhibitors. Most of what we would do in the south when we're broadcasting nitrogen, we say, well, let's put a urease inhibitor on there so we don't lose the ammonia. We're working it into the ground. We're not as worried about denitrification because of waterlogging and some of those things, but we haven't been able to convince them to add that. I suspect in future years we would have single-use inhibitors included as well. Yes, sir.
Just a question here. Okay, go
Would
ahead.
that, never mind, it looks
Yeah,
like it is, like
ESN is
ESN,
covered
yeah.
up to,
Okay, that's
and
what
they-
my question was.
this is one that we kind of lobbied for, RDAR and Canal Council lobbied for Western Canada in the fall. And they added that, but they put a limit of $4,800 per farm for ESN. But it is there, replacing ESN or
And
a
that's-
portion of your urea with ESN.
And that's still to new field?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So if you've been using it
If you've been using it on a regular basis, you're kind of hooped.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. The other one, which is kind of interesting, and this one is manure transportation and application for fields that haven't had manure in the past 10 years. So that would be manure, compost, or in some instances there might be digestate down here, but we don't see a lot of digestate applied. But so that's an interesting one, and up to $75 an acre toward those transportation and spreading or injection costs. And has to be incorporated.
Okay, here.
Is there a cap on that?
75,000
Okay.
total. Could be the exclusive application for any
So
application.
one person could take it all?
Yep. Sorry, per farm, yeah, 75,000 per farm, yeah.
Oh, a lot of them here. Oh, yeah, you'll find them.
Yeah, yeah. It's a, we even had, I shouldn't tell stories, is this being taped? There was one of, some unnamed Hutterite brethren came to me at Ag Expo because I was helping at the booth. He said they wouldn't cover our application costs because we were, but he said, so we were talking, well, how did you find, like, where you can actually inject liquid into a field next to the Hutterite colony? I said, what's your own land? How is it that land didn't have manure in the last 10 years? And he didn't quite explain that, but, so it's, a lot of this is attestation, and honesty on the part of the farmers, right? But, so this one is an interesting
By
one
the way,
too.
Rob, we're live streaming, so watch it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, good.
No, just kidding.
Some unnamed friend. Increased perennial legumes in rotation is an interesting one because what this one does is that in the first year of the program, it was that 10-year rule, but this year, like if you were planting alfalfa or a legume mix that had at least 50% legume, then it would cover the seed cost and the planting if you were getting it custom planted. So that's kind of interesting. I know when I did a presentation for Vern Turchin with Progressive Seeds, he was pretty excited about this one because, so there's a lot of applications coming in on that. Rotational grazing covers those, again, big costs for the people that are interested and qualified on this, materials and installation. Doesn't cover the in-kind, but it covers for custom fencing and things like that. So I don't know if that one could kind of skip over some of the details, but it covers, shallow buried pipelines, wet wells and waters. There's been a lot of water buggies sold, been a lot of razor grazers sold, those electric fencing systems, and this is a real great opportunity for those that are wanting to get into rotational grazing on, for the first time or on new lands. It also covers seeding into old pastures to increase, has to be no-tilled in to increase the legume content. This is a struggle to even make that work in our drier area, but it does cover that. And I'm going to kind of skip over that a little bit. The forage testing, that's in there, but really just hasn't been any applications on that. A whole bunch of things, of course, people are saying, well, what's covered and what isn't? So perimeter fences, if you're looking at grazing land for the first time, doesn't cover those perimeter fences. What does that mean? The edge of the quarter sections or sections, but it'll cover the cross fences, right? And, the deep buried water lines. Why don't we cover deep buried water lines? Well, some of the off-calf providers do, but this was a decision, and so I think it has to be within 2 feet, which is kind of been a source of frustration for some, but I'll again send you this slide. All the applicants need to provide an imagery-based description of the project, at least from, for rotational grazing, or even if you're soil sampling showing them where those fields are. That's for follow-up. Need to know that second point there, while he's crossed out that first point, which that one died yesterday. Applicants do sign an attestation, obviously. They need to provide evidence that the project happened. It could be GPS or date stamp photos. For the soil sampling, typically people are providing the soil test reports or whatever. And that you can see the rest of it, proof of payment. And if you're ineligible for those GHG emission reductions with the regulated programs if you participate or get funding from off-CAF. And important dates, it did open, applications opened on February 13th, and I think there was like 20 applications that first day. This was a slide I just got. It was, for that first year of the program, there was you can kind of look at the acres affected there, nitrogen management, rotational grazing, cover cropping. There was 640 approved applications in the first year, and doesn't quite add up the same because some put in multiple kind of areas. But you can see a lot of that cover cropping was in the south. allocated funds in that first year, and you can kind of see quite a bit, like you say, under that rotational grazing, there wasn't as many applications, but they are costly when you're doing fences and buying systems. And I will send you a PDF of those slides, but any other questions or?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Rob, for giving this presentation here. And are there any questions for Rob? Eric?
Yeah, thank you. Part of your consultation business and that you're taking applicants to run them through a program like this or help them deliver
Yeah,
that?
there's been about a half a dozen that I've, helped, and, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And in many cases, I'm not charging, because it's like, half an hour, an hour's work, and it's almost, at the rates I charge, it's hardly worth sending an invoice you. So it's been great. It's a great program for those that are eligible, and, unfortunately, it's one of those things that to be able to reward people for all of the great things that we're doing, I mean, what an incredible success story it is on dry land in southern Alberta, and even on irrigation in southern Alberta, in terms of the practices that we're doing. And really, this is trying to get us to, I think, a next level, but the government's looking hard at how do you do that? How do you kind of incent or continue to reward those that are continuing to do and doing, good practice? And so it's one of those things that there's a lot of debate right now in the ag industry about.
John?
Thank you. In practical terms, how easy or cumbersome is this process to go through for our producers?
So there's a template for each of the different categories. So let's take, for example, the cover crop. If you're doing cover crop, there's like a kind of a 3-pager, 1 page of which is, fill in the blanks kind of thing. That's pretty straightforward. You send that to your certified crop advisor, or in many cases that's going to be, finding someone for some farmers is a challenge if they're not working with an agronomist, so they're kind of looking around and they're going to maybe the environmental coordinator at the county asking, is there someone, or phoning Farming Smarter, or, then they track down somebody that can make the recommendation. So there's that part. And then they go into the RDAR portal, which is called Argo. That's Argo. It's like into that portal. And that's where most of the people have a challenge, because it's, they're asking questions in a way which is a little bit, what do they mean by this? So then they're sometimes picking up the phone and phoning me, or phoning someone with the program. So that's the part that's the most challenging. And then probably then they get their application in 5 weeks ago, and they're still waiting for approval, wondering if they can kind of go out and implement. And so there's when the project, after the fact, you have to send then evidence that you actually did that project in some way. And so then, we forgot to take photos when we were doing our fencing. Well, okay. They've been generally kind of forgiving that, but they're sort of saying, look, we need some evidence that you actually implemented and did what you said you were going to do. So that's kind of, they're trying to keep that, a GPS down. All of our photos that we take with our phone, are recorded in terms of date and even where it was. And so there's that part. And then submitting paid invoices. And that can be a challenge for some. They have to go back into that Argo portal and submit those. And so challenging for our friends with how to write colonies that don't have those technical, and for that percentage of the farmers that aren't computer savvy. So, I mean, I can help them do that, or someone can help them do that, but it's generally, I think, a little bit more challenging than some programs, but I'm told that the other off-calf delivery partners like EcoCert and Canadian Grasslands, you know, they're saying, oh, well, yours is easier than theirs. So I don't know. Yep.
Okay.
Well, just
Bill.
a point of clarification, now that you can start the project before it's approved, I know you said that may not get approved for
Yes.
funding, but also for technical reasons, even though they've got an agronomist
Yeah.
they're able to sign off.
That's right, that's right. So the agronomist is kind of, in a sense, kind of recommending that would be
That-
reasonable practice, but it still might not fit within the guidelines of the program, or the program is run out of funds. Like, I think the nitrogen management one's gonna run out of funds here as we get into the spring. So they've got $15 or $17 million, like they're able to carry some over. So they're apportioning so much to the different categories. And you could imagine, I think someone predicted that there's enough to fund about 800 applications, and they're at 600 some now or something like that. So you could kind of imagine that if you had your application in by now, hopefully that there's enough funding to support that, but then it's just a question of it being eligible, you know, so. But that was the hope, Bill, was that because they said they don't want, you know, they don't want farmers or ranchers to be thinking that it's gonna be covered, and then it wasn't. And so that'll be the frustration if people start into projects and, you know, Rob, you know, as a consulting agronomist, I'm saying, oh, this is a no-brainer. We can go out and do all that soil sampling for you and all that mapping for you. And then all of a sudden they find out afterwards that they didn't get funded because there wasn't money there or something like that. And then, so that's one of the things that we won't, that in the communication, I think that's coming out over this next week or two, they're gonna be saying that we can't guarantee that you're gonna get funded. That's based on approval of your application, but you could still begin the project after April 1st.
Okay. Jeremy?
Part of the question,
Oh, sorry.
just to clarify, so if there is a savings in greenhouse gas emissions, can you still sell those credits to say like Shell or PPE?
I think for unregulated, yes. Yep.
Jeremy?
At this table, we're always concerned about funding models. With this funding that's actually in place right now, up to 800 applicants, where do you foresee, or where is the trend within the government to essentially continue with this funding track?
And I'm outside the loop on that one, but it's such a great question, and I know with like SCAP and Provincial, probably it'd be the federal funding, I think that everyone's kind of looking to now and saying, is there going to be funding for, you know, the research and like the Living Labs is another one that's out there. You've heard of the Living Labs. There's that initiative, which is a 5-year initiative. And then I think the rumors that I'm hearing is that this kind of programming, in terms of increasing adoption, not necessarily rewarding those that are already doing the great stuff, but increasing adoption, that might continue into the future for 2 or 3 years, but that hasn't been decided at this point, so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Rob, if you've been eligible, say like last year, what's your eligibility status moving forward? Are you?
That's a great question, Lauren, yeah. So in other words, if you can apply again, but not for the same practice on the same field kind of thing. You know, so there are people that applied last, say, summer, fall, were approved, and then they're applying again for, say, soil testing, but on different fields, for example. Yep. Or manure application on different fields, yeah, so.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Thanks,
And could I have a mover that we take the information we wrote down for information? Lauren? Okay. Everybody in favor? That's carried.
Right on.
Thank you again very much.
Right on. Yep.
And
Well, good luck with calving and seeding, guys.
thank you.
Thanks, Rob, appreciate it.
And now I guess we'll turn to the service board level of service.
Actually, if we could move down to the resolutions, we'll talk
You
about,
want that one first?
yep.
Okay. Yeah.
1 and 3. Actually, I want to go all the way down to 923. Yeah, these are all draft minutes, so it'll be at the end of that, yeah.
There you go. 923.
Yeah, the next one. A little bit backwards, but there we go.
There you go. Sorry.
We'll move down to Resolution 923, and on the heels of Rob's presentation, this one is important. It's regarding synthetic fertilizer emissions. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We'll go to the therefore be it resolved. So, therefore be it resolved that the federal government of Canada adopt the 4R Climate Smart Protocol approach developed by the Fertilizer Institute of Canada and provide sustainable funding into research and development regarding fertilizer use efficiency. Secondly, further therefore be it resolved that the Federal Ministry of Environment and Climate Change suspend the 30% synthetic fertilizer emission reduction targets until the proper tools to measure emissions for producers are available. This was presented at the Ag Service Board conference in January, and there's a big upheaval over that reduction in fertilizer. This was brought forward at a council meeting a couple weeks ago, so there are things that are being done through the resolution process. Does anybody have any comments on this resolution?
Well, I think it was loud and clear that it was brought forward at the Agriculture Service Board, and I think that, well, it was, if I'm not mistaken, pretty well, very well supported.
Yeah, very important too, and this will be forwarded, this information on to council that had some questions as well.
Any questions?
All right, moving back, we're going to go to Resolution 823, and this is the one from the County of Warner. So it's the consideration of municipal, environmental, and agricultural policies for large-scale solar and related energy developments on agriculture lands. Oh, a little jumpy today. So therefore be it resolved that when federal and provincial governments approve large-scale energy developments, that they consider local environmental conditions and the policies that the local municipality has in place on the development through their permitting process. And Hillary from the planning department can come up and we'll discuss this one a little bit in further detail. So with this resolution, there's all the background information, but there's already been a response on that.
Good morning, Hillary.
Good morning.
So very quick response on this one, and it's regarding the environmental impact assessment. I think the County of Warner would like to see that, and this letter states that property they're concerned about didn't go through an environmental impact assessment. So the County of Warner tried to get ahead of the process, and they put stipulations on the development process regarding grass to be seeded and chemicals to be applied to keep the weeds down, and they never sent back information that they didn't have to do that. So here is here to discuss perhaps what can be done in that regard to get ahead of this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. Nice to be here. First time at an Ag Service Board meeting, so thank you for inviting me. So with regards to the development permitting process in Lethbridge County, so every municipality is going to have a slightly different take on how they do the permitting process, particularly around solar. So just to kind of get everybody up to speed, with regards to the county, so we do require that any solar project be rezoned to direct control here in the county, and that's to provide some transparency to the permitting process. And that council and adjacent landowners and even landowners who are involved with that project kind of are aware that there's implications to that. So county council has to go through that process, consider it, and approve it. Obviously, there's the AUC process, which can supersede ours, but we're trying our best to make sure that we're managing expectations at the county level. At the development permitting level, we do have a number of requirements in our land use bylaw with regards to the installation of a solar facility. So every solar installation is required to get a development permit from the county. Regardless, you know, they have to get the rezoning, they have to get their AUC approval, they have to get a development permit from the county because it's a development. And we do have a number of requirements in our land use bylaw that reflect what is in this resolution and kind of the discussions I've heard broadly with regards to concerns with regards to weed control and soil erosion. So we do require that they have plans and methods of weed control. It's very broad, but so with these applications, we would send them to Gary and Jeremy for their review to have some input into that, and we can be more specific in a condition. We also require that they have a preliminary grading and drainage plan that includes their site construction and deals with the management of any soil stripping and soil erosion. So we do have those requirements in there that we get with the application, and then we will add conditions onto a development permit to state that they have to do certain things. So that's how we're managing it at the development permitting level in the county. It's probably not the most perfect system because we do have to abide by what the Alberta Utilities Commission is telling us to abide by, but at the same time, I feel like these are pretty strong in terms of the county's perspective. It is a land use issue, and so that's why it's a permitting process. We do have a number of other requirements, but I think those are the ones most pertinent to this particular conversation. So I'm open to any questions or.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything we can do that the AUC cannot overrule?
Just a little clarification on that one. At the RMA, that one was also brought forward. And I think that was, and that one did carry. So that is one step in the good direction, I think. So I mean, I just
Okay.
thought I'd give you this for information. John?
Hold on, my question isn't answered.
Okay.
Is there anything we can currently do that AUC cannot overrule? Like, can we put on a distance to a property? Can we do any implications that are not overrulable?
It is very difficult because they are a higher level authority than we are. So that's why we do that direct control, so that we make those applicants aware of those. We do have setbacks to individual residences, to group country residential towns and hamlets, and we have those in our bylaws and our municipal development plan. And we also have these these recommendations in there. I'm not sure if it came down, if the AU said they were approving a project and they came for the development permit after that approval and say, you know, like the county approved the rezoning, everything was fine. If they came and said, we don't have to do weed control, I would say, I would question that strongly because it is part of our land use bylaw. It's a land use issue. They're just there to install the solar, but we're in charge of everything else. So as far as I'm concerned, some of these things that we've embedded in here are things that at the municipal level we can enforce. So I haven't heard otherwise, but the couple projects that we have dealt with in the county, I mean, there has been obviously some challenges there with the soil erosion rodent factor. So I think the next projects that we're coming in, and we're seeing a lot of interest in smaller projects now than larger projects. That seems to be a little bit of a trend. I think these smaller ones are going to be more manageable in terms of really implementing these conditions. So, Eric, I hope that kind of answers some of your questions. There are certain things that we can't, like if they said, no, we're going to approve that one next to Coaldale, probably don't have a lot that I could do about it, but I think I can do more through that development permitting process and the weed control and soil erosion aspect.
So with that, if the AUB, if they overrule the decision that the municipality have made, so where does that, the land use bylaw, where does that go?
So
Do they overrule the whole works that they can do whatever they want?
from my understanding in the last ones that we did contest, like we didn't approve one, and the AUC did approve it, so then it had to come back for reapproval from the county, from county council. It didn't really touch on the development permitting side. Like the decision of the AUC didn't seem to impact what we could do at the development permit, because because it didn't address those things. So I think AUC should be addressing these things also in their approvals, and then it should be doubled down with the county. So, but I think I didn't notice that there was anything that I couldn't do in the land use bylaw under the AUC, unless they explicitly said, no, you can't, you don't have to do weed control. And I think that would be pretty offside, to put it politely, if they would do something like that. So I feel there's a little bit of strength here. You know, it could be stronger, absolutely, and I would definitely want to work with Ag Service Board on, you know, improving our land use bylaw and those things in there, and also like promoting that to the upper levels of government to ensure that we're working together instead of being kind of at odds.
John?
Thank you. There was a number of breakout sessions related to this at the most recent RMA convention here last week. And one of the things that was a topic of discussion was that a number of these organizations that are applying for these permits through AUC seem to have it in their procedures that they go to AUC and apply for the permit to put up their either wind or their solar arrays, and then come to the municipality for the development permit in the process. I personally challenged the executive director of AUC and asked him whether that was actually, you know, where the process was. And one of the discussions that he had is that we encourage these companies to come to municipalities first. One of my suggestions was maybe that language needs to be tightened up into musts and obligated. But it's my understanding that when AUC comes in, if the municipality is informed of it, we have we don't have standing at the hearing, but we have the ability to speak and put in any of the concerns that we have. My question is that when we're dealing with these the projects that we've had in the past, is it your experience that the companies have come to us and said this is what we want to do before they went to AUC, or have they come with an AUC approval in hand and say this is what we would like to do?
So no, that's not my experience. They have always approached us first at the county and administration level. They always come to us and say, this is the project, this is what we're proposing. They do say that we will apply to the AUC first, but most of them are giving us the courtesy of saying, this is where we're looking at it. And they do give us that opportunity for some preliminary comments there. You know, what does your bylaw say? A lot of them are trying to kind of work, I think, with municipalities to a certain extent, but they also know they have this opportunity to kind of go, if the municipality says no, or we say, well, it doesn't fit with our bylaws, then they say, well, we'll apply to the AUC. And then we'll come back to you and get our rezoning and our development permit, which is kind of like, everybody knows, a little bit after the fact. There are definitely pros and cons to applying for your rezoning and development permit first and then getting your AC in the flip. So the one thing that the AUC can do is they have a higher level of expertise in looking at technical documents. So looking at, you know, because they're required to do a bunch of technical documents, you know, the wildlife survey, biodiversity, all these things. So I'm not the subject matter expert. Gary's probably not the subject matter expert in those really big documents. So in some senses, having that overview from that higher level is helpful, because they might catch on to certain things that we might, as a smaller municipality, not be able to do. At the same time, if there's a serious land issue, like proximity to, you know, group country residential development, or, you know, a residence, things like that, those should be addressed at the front end too. So I think if the two processes were brought together more closely, we'd have better success on both sides to making those projects viable, and, you know, that we get more buy-in from most of our, you know, from the adjacent landowners, the county and the province. The last one that I did receive, we do send, when we get the AUC application in, we do send a formal letter, and we do express concerns in that letter to the AUC specifically. And so we do, like you said, our standing is, we don't get any, but because it's in our municipality, we can speak on behalf of, say, our citizens and say, these are the concerns based off of our bylaws. And so in the last one I sent, talked about weed control, I talked about soil erosion, talked about proximity to other residences. All of those things were included, and that one is currently on hold due to a landowner issue that they have, so.
John?
So just to follow up on that, I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that the feeling at RMA was very much from the municipality standpoint is that if there was more engaging process and that if they would take into consideration more of the concerns of the municipality, which are the voice of the ratepayers and the landowners in the area, that it would be a smoother process.
Yeah.
Dan?
So you mentioned that they have to have, like, one of the processes they have to go through is wildlife assessment, but that's only on non-tillable land, correct? Because, like, for example, like irrigated land, there's a reason why there's an issue with this, they actually can skip that process.
Right, there are, yes, definitely in certain situations, they don't have to do all of those assessment, but
And another question is, like, what is the definition of a large scale, like how many acres is in that definition?
so in the county's bylaw, anything that's commercial scale is considered large. So that could be a 10-acre title, it could be a 20, it could be 100, 300, 600. So it's more that the only ones that we don't consider commercial are those ones that, you know, when you're putting it on your irrigation pivot, you're using it for your yard, it's mostly for personal use. Those are the ones that are covered off in our rural agriculture or other zones. And so those are just through our regular permitting process. It's those ones, anytime you're going to a commercial scale where this is solely for going into the grid, that's where that trigger is. So it doesn't really matter the size.
Okay. Phil?
Just a comment, some of these problems may be addressed and with loving threads here, with something similar to the BC or Ontario Farmland Protection Act, that they enjoy in those provinces where it actually does protect farmland. And for agriculture, a long time, we often wondered why a province like Alberta that is so dependent on agriculture, we don't have that.
So are you referring to like BC, for example, farming first? They have that in their policy, and Dan probably knows more about that one.
Yeah, it's an agricultural land reserve
Mhm.
within the Fraser Valley, outside of the Fraser Valley, correct? So, I mean, there's a process to go through that, I think. I mean, it's Alberta, you know, I think in prairies, we have this concept of you have ample amount of farmland, right, versus the extreme pressures that we see within the Fraser Valley. I don't disagree with your comment, I think that would be, I think a process of protecting, you know, high value land within the prairie farmland service that we have.
It just might be an avenue, and
It's a process that you see the developers in BC and what they do to abuse the land to pull it out of the AOR is pretty substantial.
And I know this in the past, this is brought to the government and from different organizations, but they haven't gotten any further than that. John?
I would say, though, that there is considerable political pressure and focus on this, even at the highest levels within the current provincial government, so.
All right, well, no more questions, and Hillary, I thank you for.
Thank you.
For your.
Thanks, Hillary.
You're welcome.
Your
In-
knowledge here, and I think we're gonna move on to the next one. Gary, or you got something on this?
Just a few comments on that. Weed control very well could be enforced on these sites if needed be. The problem is how are you going to do the weed control? I mean, if it comes to they don't do anything and the county has to go in, that's a very large task. So we'd be looking at contractors likely. And then the other one is soil erosion. Significant soil erosion has happened on some of these sites in Vulcan County. And they've been challenged on what's the definition of soil erosion. And typically soil erosion protects agriculture land. This isn't agriculture land anymore. So that one might be difficult to challenge, if challenged rather.
Good point, yeah. John?
Just a question regarding weed control. Because a lot of these arrays are actually set up on leased land. So who are the people that you're looking or chasing after? Who would we be chasing after in terms of the weed control? Would it be the landowner, or would it be the operator of the array?
Both. We'd be deal with first who's leasing the land, but in the end, it's the responsibility of the landowner to. The Weed Control Act is written, you know, so you can go after the landholder, not necessarily the landowner. So it'll get difficult.
What? Oh, sorry.
Well, my experience, I worked on the wind turbines for 8 years before coming back to the farm, and my experience was with NMAX specifically, and they seem to do a pretty good job in terms of weed control for out by Tabor there. But in terms of solar arrays and stuff like that, they're bigger parcels of land, and weed control could be more of an issue. I know livestock might not be an option, like especially cattle, because they like to rub up on it. But like, what about like goats and stuff like that? Like how Calgary manages their noxious weeds with goats and stuff, like fencing it off. And
I think some of these sites are looking into sheep. First all off, they have to establish some sort of vegetation, and that hasn't been done yet. There's nothing there for goats to eat except weeds right now. Yeah, but they are controlling. Like we do not have the issues yet. We have not seen them to the degree some of these other counties have. So we want to stay ahead of it, and that's why we brought this forward today.
Okay, well, thank you, Gary. So, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Les. So, Gary, are you responsible for weed issues in hamlets? And reason I ask you that question is because when solar farms or wind farms become established, they're kind of not considered ag land anymore. So would they fall underneath the same status as weeds in a hamlet?
Yeah, we can enforce the Weed Control Act on non-agriculture land. We used to enforce it in all the hamlets, but in most cases it wasn't the weeds that were an issue. It was non-sightly or unsightly, and so those are being enforced by the CPO now. We do once in a while get involved if it's a large acreage in, adjacent to a hamlet that's affecting agriculture land.
Okay. So we'll just take this as information. I don't think we need a motion for that. I think that we should probably move on to the level of service.
Yep, let's move on to the Ag Service Board level of service. We're not going to go through the whole document. That would take quite some time. A few years ago...
What? Read it verbatim?
No.
Oh, please.
So what happens here with the level of service, this document is presented to the Ag Service Board, and then it'll be forwarded on to Council. It's set at the budget time on what our level of service will be. So in the fall meeting, we'll probably come back, I'll do a report, and we'll find some way of adjusting or asking about the level of service. But we have to remember that we have an Ag Service Board grant, legislative duties that we must do to a certain degree, and also the costs of doing extra service, or how is the community going to feel if services are cut in certain areas.
So preemptively with that, when recommendations that come from the ASB committee, those could potentially affect any kind of level of service amounts that we essentially have in here, and those would have to be approved by council through the budget process at that time. So September is a great time to discuss if there is any expansion or contraction in the level of service that we are currently providing within this document, and then that can be taken to council for final decision.
And the good thing about September is that we're through a lot of our activities for weed control, and a good portion of the county's been mowed. We'll know where we sit budget-wise. It is going to be tougher to provide the same level of service at the same price. I mean, everybody wants to say you can do more with less. Now it's going to be, if you want to do more money is going to have to be put in. There's just no more tightening up to be done.
So basically, you want to take this one to the fall meeting?
Yeah, we'll take it to the fall meeting, but there's a few changes I'll bring to your attention here.
Okay.
This has already been set, and the money amounts are in there as well for your review.
I was just gonna add, so we will bring this back at the fall meeting. This will be going to council coming up, if approved by the, or if adopted by the ASB committee.
Okay. John?
Sorry, slight confusion. We're discussing this today to bring back to council,
On April 6th.
okay. And then in the fall, basically, the fall discussion is how well did we do?
Well,
And what do we want to change for next year?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically what, the level of service for this year is pretty well the same as what we've provided last year. Fundings have gone up for inflation, but the costs of equipment and fuel remain high. So we want to see how we do this year. We're trying to manage those programs at budget or under budget. I do not intend to go over. So when it comes to the end of the year and we're looking like our mowing's over budget or we can't balance that, you're going to see less mowing that get completed in some of the areas. And I'll show you those two maps here in a minute on some of those areas where they maybe don't get a second cut.
Lloyd?
I just have a couple of questions underneath your strategies, and I just, particular the to control and spread the establishment of noxious and prohibited weeds in Lethbridge County. So by saying that, do you mean, is our list of weeds different than the provincial one?
Yes, we'll have a couple of weeds that are upgraded. One weed that is on our list that doesn't sit on the provincial noxious list is kochia. We chase kochia, many counties don't, and you can drive around the province and see what happens when you don't try to control kochia. And then the other is scentless chamomile. We've got that upgraded as well. You must control that one. Otherwise, we go with the provincial list.
Would Canada thistle fall into that one too then?
Yeah, it would fall into noxious category.
Okay.
So just one area to highlight is under the weeds. We're going to work with the Planning and Development Department to develop a permitting program system for solar and large industrial developments to include submission of vegetation and pest control plans to ensure compliance with the Weed Control and Pest Control Acts. That's why Hillary was here today. Pest control, why that's in there. We just want to bring recognition that when they put in a plan, they've got to take care of the gophers. If you got a 3,000 acre site on grassland, or used to be grassland, you've got a potential very, very large problem. Maybe not a big a deal here in Lethbridge County, but some of those large grassed areas. So we want to at least put that in their mind that you got to do something. And in the county, they are doing gopher control. They're doing it here already. So. No.
Now, with that being said, just as part of
question
also.
here, John.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, and maybe we should have had this conversation or asked this question when Hillary's here, but I mean, as I see it and as I understand it, the problem with these larger solar arrays, that the establishment of vegetation is extremely tough because it's 90% of the actual ground is shaded by the arrays. And specifically in areas where, like here, where we have high winds and no ability to establish any kind of ground cover on it, the erosion, I think, is a pretty serious problem. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, you are. I mean, there's ways around it. I mean, you could, what we do in our ditches is we hydroseed, and then there's a tackifier that holds that down. That would be a big expense for some of these large areas, but they've got to keep things under control. And some of the grass species that they're trying to seed are not their native grass seed species is what they want. You know, crested wheat might grow, but it's not what they want there. So with that type of grass, it takes at least 5 years to get going, especially on dry areas.
But would it, would it actually grow underneath the arrays?
I think you could, there are some grass species that you could get going, yeah. And that's where the County of Warner ran into a little bit of trouble. They were wanting to dictate what grass species went in there, and then it come back, they didn't want to plant that type of grass, so.
So this would come, like, this would come in the land use bylaw, that they would have to plant the grass? Because, I mean, if you don't do anything like that, you're gonna have the soil erosion. So we need to make a decision on that in a way that what we are gonna be recommending on this issue.
Yeah, it mainly is through development. There are, those plans are in place before they submit, I would imagine, but we're just trying to make it aware through, the Old Man Regional Planning Commission too has been doing some work with some of the counties to clear up so that they're ahead of these things as well, and I know Hillary's probably working with them as well. We're just trying to get ahead of this now before we have a 4,000 acre project here that it's out of control and everybody's phone's ringing.
Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. On that, you mentioned that grass, and I happen to know the person who was seeding it, and he spoke exactly the same thing. The county recommended grass was germinating and working, and somewhere, some of their on-site environmentalists decided that, no, this is the wrong grass, you can't do this. And they had to switch, and yeah, it didn't go well from there out. So we do need to have the power to implement that in there.
Just a comment for clarification. So most native species in an environment like this would not grow well in shade. It kind of goes back to your comment, John.
Yeah.
Well, it's a shade and it's a water issue, right?
Yeah.
Normally, grasses that grow well in shade, they grow well in shade because there's high water concentration. When you've got shade and no water, because the grasses that do grow well here grow well with no water and lots of sunlight.
Yeah.
Well being a very relative term.
Better
but
than most.
When you're trying to plant something that grows well in shade, but you can't supply it with the water, the success isn't having anything grow there.
Kosher will do well.
Go, she would do well. I think,
That's well everywhere.
I think we're kind of getting in the weeds of this one now. So maybe we should move on to the rest of the level of service.
All right, moving down, we just got that same statement in the soil erosion regarding soil conservation, exact same statement. So these are all the activities we do. You seen my report. So my report earlier just reported on all of these activities for last year. One thing that has changed as well is the brushing. We had the brushing that we were going to do it only during certain months. We've extended that period, so brushing will only take place from June to October for downed trees or brush caused by adverse weather conditions. What we found is that the winter cover is not effective time to brush sometimes. So we're going in the fall, in November, and also in the spring. So it would be April, May time of year. So we've extended when we do that, and we are treating most trees with a chemical so they don't regrow. Often it takes a few applications. It doesn't have any uptake on the suckers it kills. It doesn't kill the main tree. So we're having a lot of success with the brushing program once we use those chemicals. And then when you get down to the appendices, that is all of the policies we have, and that sets a guideline to how we proceed with most jobs that we do. Used to be policies, now we've rolled them into this level of service as one document. And it became our business plan. The province requires a business plan that we set out. We had a whole bunch of documents. They're all redundant, so this is the one we are going with. Yeah, Jeremy pointed out we got one bylaw that is referred to that it needs to be changed to just the 2023 year. So does anybody have any questions on the level of service?
Eric?
Yeah, thank you. What's the total ask budget-wise changed over last year?
You're putting me on the spot. I can't remember specifically the number. I think we are
It was 3 to 4%, I thought.
3 to 4%. I think was the increase in the ASB budget from 2022 to 2023. I apologize. I'd have to look at that specifically. I don't know what that number is. There was the increases to equipment costs and fuel costs that we saw in other departments.
Yeah, and that's where 3 or 4%. I'm wondering if we're almost a little low on that for fuel increases and equipment increases.
John?
Thank you. Yeah, along the same vein, I was just wonder if we could get a bit of a refresher on how much of the budget is actually taken care of by grants, roughly.
So for this budget specifically, the base ASB grant is $123,000 per year. The extension portion that we have, which is an additional grant, is $91,000. So in total, we've got $214,000 in grants that we get. The total budget for the ASB overall is right around $1 million.
Yeah.
20% is covered under a grant.
Yeah, so fuel costs and equipment costs went up last year, and we were under budget by $4,000. So to ask for too much more, I mean, let's prove what we can do first and set a baseline this year. This is the year that we're going to find out what things really cost, and we are going to manage down if we have to once we realize what the costs are in September. You can cut the amount you mow. Most of the spraying is done by then, but we actively manage the budget on how much we do, and we look to balance it between all of our programs, not necessarily one program. We want to meet our level of service. That was what is approved by council, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have a high-end level of service with the costs that we're incurring.
Now, with that being said, we'll obviously, as the year progresses, we monitor the budget month to month to month, and we could see essentially, and we could have that discussion in September, and that would probably go to council if there is that need for additional funding sources to essentially meet some of the potential service points that we need to.
John?
Thank you. I'd like to move that the Agricultural Service Board 2023 level of service be recommended to County Council for approval.
Thank you, John. So John moves that we bring this to the County Council. And any more questions on this one? If not, everybody in favor? That's carried. All right, and we'll move where we at with lunchtime. Lunch is going to be brought in at 11:45 or something like that, I heard?
Yes.
Okay. So do we want to go through our correspondence, or?
I think we're good. Those correspondence are just for information that for you folks to look at. We can move on to Alan's training, and he can go through that at lunchtime as well. So.
Okay. So now we have Alan's session here, and I think it's about 4 hours, isn't it, Alan? So if you come forward, welcome, Alan, again, and what?
Some questions about terms of reference, about how many meetings we had in here.
I thought we were going to do it at the end of the meeting.
Oh, we can do it now.
Fine, sure.
You mean the end of the meeting after Alan's done?
Yeah,
Let's do it now.
We can do it now, too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, during the terms of reference.
Eric, I think you had the question here?
Yeah. Sorry, Gary?
No, during the terms of reference, yeah, we discussed we have 2 meetings per year. Was there something someone?
I was sleeping. No, I missed it somehow, and I had been thinking about that a bit. If we're heading into the direction of being a working board and participating on this, I have an appetite for an additional meeting, up to 2. A quarterly meeting on ag services is actually something that is, at least we can have direction and follow-up versus twice a year. It's just so far in between to actually have any amount of connection with it. So it's something I'd like to entertain and see if there's an appetite among the board.
So with that, would you like one more, like in between, or, because I mean, as soon as the fall ends, then the Agriculture Service Board, the winter period is of course not as busy for us to have to make any decisions on that. So if we would have one more, would you, or do you would just want to have them as we go along?
One more would suffice in the summer, absolutely. I do wonder though if we're putting some effort into being forward-thinking and comprehensive on this, that some of that work happens in the winter though.
I think what can be done too is perhaps a workshop, not an official meeting, on setting our priorities.
Yes, that would make sense, yeah.
Okay, John?
I would support that. I think that, having a meeting in the springtime saying this is what we're gonna do, and have a meeting in the fall time saying this is what we did, doesn't really give the board a lot of opportunity to hear how things are going, and if there's any sort of change in direction needed. I think we would have some value in having a meeting in sort of midsummer to just an update. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 3-4 hour meeting. It is something that we can get together and have a very short meeting, but I think there is good value in that.
So I kind of agree with you, but I think that, especially the fall meeting, that's part of the big one that is necessary before the budget comes along. And maybe Jeremy, you want to have a couple of words to say there too?
It might be a little bit early, I think, at this point to add another meeting specifically, because if we do, we'll have to add that into the terms of reference. I think it's important that we have probably an ASB workshop here in June or July, depending on what we can manage for schedules between committee members. From there, you set your strategic direction, and then you decide whether or not you're going to add those more meetings in to essentially add more substance, or sometimes these are, we have a 3-hour agenda today, but this one is fairly full compared to previous ones we've had. So it might be a question of the workshop as a offsetting non-official meeting might be the best way to go.
For education purposes and stuff like
Yep.
that. Yeah. Okay, John?
So from terms of reference standpoint, the terms of reference that we're submitting for approval says meetings are to be held regularly with a minimum of twice per year. Additional meetings will be identified as required by the chair. So we really don't have to do any fine tuning to the terms of reference if we want to hold 3 regular meetings and a workshop during the course of the 12-month period, and the workshop being the winter one.
That's correct. Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it's up to not the committee, your side of it on scheduling, but sooner than later is perfectly okay to work on direction and those questions that we had from Jeremy to mull over them and work on it, of what we want to see this looking like. So I would support, June or earlier.
Okay, shall we do it that way, that in conjunction with staff and everything like that we do it as call of the chair? Call of the chair.
Yeah, that's included in there, so I think if we would like to proceed this way, the chair can call a meeting.
So then we don't have to change anything?
No.
Basically, yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Oh, we should set a next meeting before we end this.
We can send it out an email for meetings. And
We'll see what works.
calendar meeting or something like that, yeah. Okay. Okay, Alan,
Yes.
welcome, and I hear you're gonna have, gonna do some education here, and I would say the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and connecting with you again. Just for the news, our grant, ASB grant on the legislation side was moved up, was increased. We're just amending the agreements for the last 2 years, 20, 23, and 24, to adjust for that. So finance, we have done our fair share, and the agreements with finance for approval. And once they have been approved, we are going to be sending those agreements out very fast to be signed by ASBs or council or chairman. And once they're signed, then we want to move very fast before things are happening. And the reporting time for is June, May and June. Those 2 months are for reporting. And once we get those reports, then we can run the reports through the grant agreement, grant management system, and then release the money for 2023. Okay, so I'm here to discuss a few things that for the new ASB members. Who are the new ASB members now? Just two,
And we're missing one.
We're missing one, okay. Yeah, just to go through what it means to be a member of ASB, Agricultural Service Board. To understand Agricultural Service Board, we have to take a few steps back into history and see where we came from. So basically, this is the cooperation between the provincial government and the municipalities or local authorities. So in 1920s, things were looking excellent. Agriculture was growing at huge leaps, and mechanization was taking place. Down here, irrigation was just expanding. There's no tomorrow. Things were looking excellent. And then came 1930s. Maybe class might have been alive at that time, but I don't think so. So the weeds were growing, cannabis was growing, and the soil was blowing, and it made Lethbridge soil erosion activities look like a baby, those days. So the provincial government and a couple of local authorities go together because the provincial government realized that work could be done more efficiently and effectively by the local authorities because the problem was on the local level. So they set up the two counties, RDAR and Conridge, which is nowadays Rockview. They set up a committee, and in that committee we had two councillors, two farmers, and ministers' representation from the provincial government. And they were given a task of figuring out what we can do to control infestation of weeds and soil erosion. So basically, that was the first ASB group, and this was in 1943. So within a very short time, 1944, they were seeing results, were seeing success. And 1944, the counties had a conference, and they passed a resolution, the first ASB resolution, to expand the program and actually make it more legal, come up with the ASB Act. So this is the resolution that the counties came up in their conference in 1944. And this was November. And by spring of 1945, they had already created the ASB Act and was enacted in 1945. So that's a little bit of history for those who are new, just to understand how the provincial government has been working with local authorities under the ASB Act. So the ASB Act was formed under the Municipal Government Act, and it's to have the members put more weight, like what Eric was saying, we need to put more weight on agriculture. Because what was happening those days is that the council will meet and they start with infrastructure, they start with other issues, and by evening they were talking about agriculture. And so you can see that by the evening they were super tired to talk about agriculture. So the ASB was created to give agriculture more emphasis and attention. So the components of ASB basically is an act that enables the local authorities to form a governing body, which is the ASB, to implement the Soil Conservation Act Agriculture Pest Act, Weed Control Act. And we do have duties under the Animal Health Act. So under the Animal Health Act, the ASB basically duty under the inspector, the agriculture fieldman, is to report diseases, and at the time of emergency, in case of emergency, is to assist. So in a nutshell, this is the picture. So the ASB is influenced or formed under the ASB Act, which is the Umbrella Act. And this was enabled by the Municipal Government Act to come into existence. And once that act is in existence, the local authority will form ASB to govern the other acts, including the ASB Act. And the other act under your legal are those three, and then assisting the Animal Health Act under the Chief Veterinarian. So what are the responsibilities of the ASB? As members of the ASB, you understand that you as a body, you advise the council to move on to the activities that you control, which is the activities of the ASB, the legal side of things, and also the sustainable side. So you assist the Animal Health Act, we have said that. You enhance other aspects of sustainable agriculture. I know you were talking about climate change and things that are pertaining to the second grant that you get, the management sustainable grant, which is environmental grant. You folks, you get, I think if I'm not mistaken, you get the highest amount of money under that program. Right, Gary?
That's right,
Yeah, you and Red Deer. Because you, in the past, you have shown that you do a very effective job in sustainable agriculture. Yeah, so another thing ASB is to develop policies to put teeth on the acts. So there are only two criteria for anybody to be a member of the ASB. And those two criteria is that you are well familiar with local agricultural concerns and issues, which I am assuming because of Lethbridge being the way it is, all of you guys are farmers. And so you progressive, I should say progressive farmers, eh? Eric is looking at me. Yeah, so, yeah, so those two are the criteria for being a member of the ASB board. So the local authority, when they're looking for who should be a member of the board, those are the two criteria. And because you do guys, you do have a mix of council and large, members at large, and that's my favorite because council, they're very much educated or know how to, the procedures involved in policy formulation and study. And so when you have councillors, they have that experience and education in formulation of policies and bylaws. So the two criteria being a member of. And one thing that when I go to places where they don't have members at large is that sometimes when the council is making decisions, they call themselves, they wear two hats, ASB and council, and sometimes they forget to do the council duties, and they do the duties of the council under ASB umbrella, and that can be confusing. So the council or municipality's job is to approve, because the ASB's advisory is not elected, and the council is to make sure that the fieldman is appointed, and the appointment is recorded in minutes. So when we come for field visit and say, has the fieldman been appointed by council, we need to see the evidence of that from a legal point of view, just in case someday you get audited. If Gary is not appointed, I know he has been appointed, has been around for a long time, and I saw the minutes when he was hired. So when the fieldman is hired, he's appointed by council, and he's an inspector as long as he is employed. So the council must appoint inspectors as well. ASB must be appointed by the council. The council does the bylaws, and the council, ASB once a year, gives the council their strategy or the plans, and the council approves that. And then sometimes what is often forgotten is the council must appoint the appeal committees. And for the three acts that ASB is responsible for, the appeal committee's requirements are slightly different from one to the other. So here, and you guys, you can stop me anytime and give me input or disagree with me. So these are the three acts that are under the umbrella of the ASB Act. As far as the appeal committees are concerned, the WEED Act specifies that the appeal committee must be independent. So what does that mean, Gary? Independence.
Independent from council or the ex-service board. So every organizational meeting, we put forward our folks are going to be on the appeal committee.
Yeah, so the reason why that is required and the Weed Control Act is because if ASB or council are going to hear of an issue Gary ran into in writing the inspector's notice or local authority notice, you don't know that notice is going to be appealed. But once you hear of it prior, then you're biased. So it's better to have somebody who is far away from you guys, who is not a member of the ASB or council, that they can come in and give the ratepayer a fair share of hearing during the appeal if it does happen. So independence, the Weed Control Act stipulates that. And the Agricultural Pest Act stipulates that the appeal committee should be for the season of January calendar year. It should be appointed for the season of January to December. That's the only stipulation the Agricultural Pest Act requires. So I don't know how you guys satisfy that here. You have your organizational meeting in the fall, and you do choose your appeal committees at that time. So do you choose that appeal committee to be effective for a calendar year, or how do you do it?
We do it from January to the end of the year. So although we're appointing them in October,
Yeah.
they're for the following year.
Okay, yeah. And the Soil Conservation Act is the most straightforward. The Soil Conservation Act stipulates that if the ASB is in existence, then it is the appeal committee for the Soil Conservation Act. So I just bring that so that you're aware of the differences in requirement of appeal committees. Because when I'm doing my field visit, which is actually program audits, I do run into these issues. And we try to work together with the counties to make sure that we are doing things according to the Act's requirement. So in general, the role of the ASB is basically policy and administration as an advisory board to the council. Your strategy needs to be reviewed quite often to be a living strategy. If a 3-year strategy needs to be reviewed by you guys, and if you see a need to adjust, you recommend that to the council. You participate in promoting the work of the ASB, extension and education, both on legislation, sustainable, and if you're along the border of Saskatchewan and Alberta, and then you also participate in controlling the rats from coming into our province. And of course, strategic planning. Once a year, as I indicated, through strategic planning, you report to council for approval and give Gary direction. Even though Gary is employed by the county, you guys as an ASB, you're the governing body that sets the direction of the programs. Just to mention a few, those are the roles of the ASB. Of course, strategy, I've seen, Gary does a good job here. I've seen RDAR too doing the same thing. They use the strategy as a reporting document. So within that strategy, you have your vision, mission, and values, of course, mirroring the county's values. And you have the goals, and some of those goals are targeting some of those activity areas, which are the acts. So you have the weed control goal, and then within those goals, you have targets and measurables, so you can see the progress you're making. And visiting those goals and looking at the progress and making those progress more measurable is very important. Additionally, you have to ensure that the inspectors and the fieldmen are appointed as per acts. Any questions so far? The new guys. And anytime you have a question, these other guys are gurus, eh? Gary knows this thing in and out. Yeah, so you interfere with me and bring up a question or a discussion, and I can always learn from you guys, even though I've been doing this thing for a long time, eh? So another aspect of the ASB Act.
Just one moment.
Yeah.
Lunch is here.
Yeah.
I see you come through. So, shall we take a little break?
Okay.
Lunch? And what do you guys prefer? Have lunch here, or you want to have it across the road and go?
The road is busy. Yeah, they're busy.
Oh, they're busy.
Yeah, we have to be downstairs over here.
No, then we'll just have, take lunch here and, maybe take 15 minutes.
Sure, why not? Okay, so I will stop here.
We'll just go back, everybody's done, get done with it.
Yeah. So I'll stop here and then we can roll on when we come. And this is going to be a nice discussion because I want to see your experiences over the years with respect to this. Yeah. I know. Yeah, it was for Provincial. The last time I saw you when I moved down. So I moved out of Provincial in 2000 and joined the irrigation division out of Brooks. So I was in Brooks as an irrigation specialist for 4 years.
Was Ted still there?
Yeah, I worked with Ted. Okay, thanks for lunch, guys. It was delicious.
Oh, you get the bill.
And I give it to you. Anyway, so another aspect that is often overlooked is the aspect of taking land under supervision or reclamation as empowered by the ASB Act. You guys, do you have any experience with this or long?
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
So how did it go? Were you here that time?
I don't. I was not, but I heard about it.
Okay. So this, the ASB Act gives you an ability or authority to take land that is infested in weeds or is blowing due to wind erosion or water erosion, to take it under control as local authority. So within the ASB Act, there's a place there, procedure that is outlined. I encourage you guys, this is a public document, print out the ASB Act and read and know the procedure to follow, because you never know when you run into this situation. Yeah, so to take land, usually if you're going to take it under supervision, it means that the owner is willing to work with you. But there's some ratepayers out there that are just bad characters. So taking land under supervision is the first step, and if it doesn't work, then you go to reclamation. But you know, if you're dealing with Alan who has got history, then you can just go to step 2 right away to save yourself grief. And at step 2, there's a bylaw that is supposed to be developed and enacted to enable you to go through the legal hoops of taking land to reclaim. Yeah, so I just encourage you to read about that, but I mentioned this because this is often forgotten that the ASB Act has got a second portion of it, of giving local authorities power to take land that is not being managed properly and controlling the issue. So, you guys are the governing body as ASB, and Gary, as a fieldman, is the administrator of the program. You set direction for Gary, and that direction is approved by council, and Gary takes those marching orders to move on. So who is a fieldman? A fieldman is an employee of the local authority. Depending in the structure of the administration, most of the fieldmen report to the CAO. In the other regions where they report to somebody in between. You have a question, Eric? Yeah. So he's a fully employed employee of the county. He's a qualified administrator that implements the legislation that we just covered under the ASB, the Weed Act, the Soil Conservation Act, and the Agriculture Pest Act. And on the bottom there, the fieldman is designated officer. So any other acts that are related to agriculture, rural, that are related to agriculture, the SPCA or whatever, the fieldman is an officer under the law to implement those acts. So his authority goes beyond just what we are dealing with here. So that's who a fieldman is. And when a fieldman is hired and approved by council, it is the council that gives the fieldman power to be an inspector under the acts. So I've gone to some counties where they've hired a fieldman, but the council has not approved. I'm trying to emphasize that in different ways. The council has not approved. That fieldman is illegally doing the work. So the council must appoint that fieldman as a designated officer of the acts. Soil Conservation Act, Weed Act, and Agriculture Pest Act. And he's also authorized personnel under the Animal Health Act. So when...
A question on that, and Gary, but do we have any trouble with the Animal Health Act?
The Animal Health Act come to play with the AB flu here. They let us know about it, but if they required us to help, they would have
often other places that have had to deal with anthrax or things like that, the federal government comes in and they don't really involve the ag service folks.
Yeah.
BC was one of them, probably that.
We don't want to be involved when the feedlots have a big disease that can turn into, big issue.
We just had Ralph Body come back.
So our lead in Animal Health Act is our chief veterinarian, Keith. And so when there's an emergency, let's say BSE or avian influenza, our system, by our system I mean the ASB system, what we are trying to work on is that what happened there on the northeast with tuberculosis, the communication side, because the two acts overlap, the federal act and the provincial act, they overlap. And once the CFI comes in, they're just like machine. Eh? So what we are trying to do, this federal guys will bring in groups after one, and there's no continuity in communicating what is happening on the ground. So what Keith and Brad is the fellow who can come and talk about the emergency planning as it relates to agriculture. And then the emergency planning as it relates to agriculture thing, Gary, you have a plan, eh?
We're currently developing one.
Yeah, it can fit into overall emergency planning of the county, because quite often agriculture is forgotten. I know when they had fire in high level, I was getting phone calls, who is the fieldman for Mackenzie County? Because they had all the plans except they did not have plans for what we do with the animals when the evacuation is taking place. So that's how we, ASP, can fit into this. Say, okay, we have an emergency plan that enables the commander at the command center to know what needs to be done and who to contact in the command chain of command. So yeah, so the kids, so what you're trying to work on, because the fieldmen are close to the ground, we want to see if we can negotiate with the federal guys so that the fieldmen can maintain the communication aspect of what's going on the ground with the local ratepayers. So there's that continuity, because there's sometimes, they get frustrated. So we have been told this and this is happening, but we want that communication too, for the sake of our producers to understand what's going on. Yeah. And then, of course, is a manager under the managing the resources of the county and also implementing the policies that you folks develop. And those policies put teeth on the acts. So in 1997, the ASB Act was revised, and they did something that I like, and that is enabling. So what does that mean? Enabling means that not all municipalities are created the same. So they were given freedom to choose the structure of the ASB. And that's why you see some say only councillors are going to be on the ASB, and others say, wait a minute, to satisfy those criteria I just mentioned to be a member of the ASB, we need to bring in members at large. And that's why I say I like that system, because during election, the councillors lose their mind, and we need to have some continuity that is not politically related during election particularly. That's why I like. You know what I mean? So the members at large will carry on the business as usual when politicians are worried about who to please. Sorry, I've never been a politician, I'm just imagining. So yeah, so enabling aspects since 1997 was a good thing. It gives the local authorities to choose the structure and membership of the ASB. And so that aspect is good. So we've gone through this: administration, regulation, sheriff, the man sitting here, communication with the government and other counties around, and